Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Ever lived in a haunted house? What are your stories? I lived in a house with 4 girls and 4 animals in college. One night I happened to have the house to myself, which was fabulous because I had a piece of paper to write. So, I'm in my bed with my laptop and I hear a scratch on the door. It's the dog Nico, and he's shaking and whining. As soon as I open the door, the 2 cats Ralph and Beaner streak in behind him and jump on my bed. I squeeze in between all of them, and I resume my studying. Suddenly, Ralph's hair stands on end and Nico starts to whine. Beaner's claws are digging into my legs as soon as I hear footsteps upstairs in the hallway. It's a pretty short hallway, probably about 20 feet, but the footsteps keep walking, and walking, and walking past the outer wall of the house into the next door neighbor's house. Nico starts growling when the footsteps turn around and I hear them sprinting back in our direction, and then a door slams shut. By this point my heart is racing and Nico is barking up a storm, so I grab a baseball bat and walk upstairs. Nobody was home but me and the animals. I've got a story to tell. This isn't my house, but my cousin's, and I practically lived there anyway. I don't believe in ghosts at all, but my family does, vehemently. Growing up in an Asian country, superstitions were practically fact, and it wasn't easy for a person to dismiss them. So, when my cousin said he saw a strange man standing outside the gate, muttering odd things, and leaving, the family was a little taken back. Who was this guy? Immediately everyone thought that the house had been marked or cursed. Several strange occurrences were reported. One of the girls said that when she entered her bedroom, she saw a white woman dressed Victorian style sitting on her bed, crying, "We were formerly an English colony." Doppelgangers of family members were seen. At night, more than a few people reported seeing a strange furry figure peering furtively into the bedroom. It all reached a breaking point when my cousin suddenly broke out into a fit in the middle of the day. He had no history of epilepsy whatsoever. He was writhing on the floor, babbling incoherently about a bearded man standing in the corner of the room, glaring at him. The family then decided they had had enough of this and went to a local priest to cleanse the house. Things seemed to settle after. I personally never bought into it, but as a child I really couldn't say much. Who knows what really happened anyway? I have tons of related stories if you're interested. I recall a school haunting that had us all sent home for the day. Okay, here's the school story. This was a sort of string of several incidents that climaxed in one important thing that got us all sent home for the day. First, the school is pretty old, built during the British occupation, and actually contains secret exits. Certain parts of the school were permanently closed, which of course led to rumors among the students. My favorite was that a deformed kid lived there, forever shunned by the school. Second, we all witnessed a shaken, crying janitor being escorted out by some of the teachers, who were trying to calm her down. We were all told she was ill, but the rumor was that she saw something she shouldn't have seen in one of the stairwells near the locked area. Third, the ever-popular toilet, where all the boys went to secretly have a smoke. It was a boys' school. In the same week as the janitor's breakdown, there was a huge gathering at the toilet, and we saw teachers yelling at kids to get back to their classrooms. The toilet was then shut down. The rumor? One of the boys was taking a dump, and when he came out of the cubicle, he saw several wet, long hair plastered on the wall. Think The Grudge. The grand finale? Someone got possessed. One of the boys went into a frenzy and had to be held down. He was speaking in a very strange dialect, which was quite alien in the area, and strangest of all, in a woman's voice. His parents and an ambulance had to be called. Sometime later, we were all told that we could leave for the day. More rumor, after we left, the school got a priest or traditional healer to cleanse the school. I honestly have no time for these superstitions, but I'm surrounded by them, so it can get interesting. Also, a day off school. Thanks, ghosts. My mom's convinced that the house I lived in until I was in kindergarten was haunted. Apparently the previous owner was a nice old lady and she died in the house before we bought it. She has a lot of stories about hearing doors creak, voices, and footsteps in the hallway before my sister and I were old enough to walk. Pretty standard ghost stuff. But the weirdest part she talked about is that sometimes in the middle of the night when no one was in my room, my mobile would go off and my crib would be rocking when my mom walked in, and I'd be dead asleep. She thinks that when I was upset in the night, the ghost of the old lady would help calm me down in the night. When I was 1, my mom's father died. We were in the car, and I frantically tried getting my mom to look out the window of the car saying, "Papa flies, look Papa flies." When we got home she had a message on the answering machine saying he had passed away. She was only 19 and there was no anticipation of his death. She has a dozen stories of me crying. She would come in to check on me, and by the time she got there, I would be laughing and tell her, "Papa tickling me." We also had this music box that played "You Got a Friend in Me" from Your Story. It barely worked and you had to open it for it to play. In the middle of the night, my parents would hear it on the monitor, panic, come to check on me, and I would be sleeping. The song would be playing out of a closed music box. My in-laws tell a story about how when my wife was a baby she was terribly fussy, especially at night. One night after she was down to sleep my mother-in-law was walking into the kitchen and took a look down the hallway. Wife's room was at the end of the hall, and she could see what appeared to be a man in a trench coat leaning over her crib calming her down. My mother-in-law thought, "Oh, that's nice. He's looking after her too," and went on with her business. A few minutes later it sank what she saw and thought and freaked out. My father-in-law got up thinking she was weird and saw the man there as well. I think what freaks them both out the most is how not weird it felt or seemed. To this day they'll swear it was real and have come to describe the man as an angel of sorts. They saw and knew that he wasn't there to hurt my wife. I guess she calmed down at night after that. The screaming nights ended there. I did not believe in ghosts. Sure, I was entertained by the notion, but anyone who came out and stated that they believed in ghosts, I dismissed as New Age hippies or whatever. And then I lived in a haunted house. The bathroom door would open violently if anyone ever closed the latch, so often that we came to count on it. I asked my roommate if he ever noticed a red light in the spare bedroom, as I always did, when walking up the stairs in the dark. He did. I'd always go into the spare room to investigate but could never find the source of the light. These things, I could explain away. Then weirder things started to happen. One night, I was sitting in the living room with my GF and my roommate, when I noticed the shape of a woman's face appear / in the pane of glass / of the window in the other room. We all witnessed this. Even then, I tried to explain it away as a trick of the light. What finally convinced me that something was happening was one time when I was brushing my teeth, something tugged insistently on my sleeve, and I'm 100% sure that I didn't catch it on anything. I was in the middle of the bathroom. Have you ever been fishing? It was like a fish nibbling on the line, except on my t-shirt sleeve. That freaked me out. Still, stranger things happened. We'd hear footsteps upstairs while home alone. I often saw shadows out of the corner of my eye. One time, I even saw a shadow while looking right at it, / in the middle of the room / not up against a wall. I moved around to make sure, for 5 minutes or so. Twice, while heading up the stairs to my room for bed, I heard a woman's voice say goodnight to me, over my shoulder. The strangest thing that happened was New Year's Eve, 3 years ago. My roommate and I were hosting a party, and waiting for people to show up, sitting in the living room. Suddenly, I felt something brush against my arm, and the light bulb in the lamp I was sitting beside / exploded / There were a few other things that happened, and some I'm forgetting, I'm sure, but the fact is that too many strange things happened for it to be a coincidence. I have since moved out of the house, but the belief remains something strange was happening there. I've experienced this. When I still lived with my parents I experienced some weird things. My room was in the basement, and I remember a couple of times that I heard footsteps upstairs, but when I went to investigate I found myself home alone. I remember one night when I heard someone come down the stairs. A few moments later there was a door opening somewhere. I called out but received no answer. I asked my parents about it the following morning, but they had been fast asleep upstairs the entire night. I've also heard faint and short whispers at times, but I usually just dismissed it all as random noise emitted by an old wooden house. The thing that freaked me out the most, however, was that one time when I saw a shadow in the middle of a corridor, not up against a wall. I've caught glimpses of shadows and movement in the corner of my eye at times, but I usually dismiss it as some hair that got stuck in the corner of my eye or just me being tired in general. This one time, however, I was walking down the hallway towards the bathroom when there was a shadow that flashed and then disappeared right in the middle of the hallway, just a couple of feet away from me. It was gone in less than a second, but it had not been in the corner of my eye, it had been in the center of the hallway and the center of my field of vision. It was over fast, but it was definitely the shadow of a person wearing a long dress. I moved out of the house almost 2 years ago and I haven't had anything remotely similar occur to me since. Quite sure my grandmother's house is haunted. One time I was walking out of the bedroom and as soon as I opened the door a ghost-like hand reached for me. I jumped back and shut the door. Another incident at the same house. I was outside with my dog, and she took off running and barking towards the driveway. I saw someone walking down the private drive towards her house. I said, "Grandma, who is here?" The dog stopped in her tracks, stopped barking, and ran back to me. I couldn't see anyone there anymore. Grandma didn't see anyone to begin with. Lots of strange noises and mishaps like broken dishes and missing things in that house too. I live in Victoria, and it is one of the most haunted cities, I think. Along with Cigar Rose Castle we have Beacon Hill Park, Point Ellis House, Hatley Castle, Helmsman House, and many more. I actually have a story about when my classmates and I visited Helmsman House in about grade 3 or 4. A little bit of history, Helmsman House was the house of the very first doctor in Victoria. To take care of patients, he would look after them in his house and they sometimes died. Many of the workers there said they'd hear creaking and slamming doors etc. throughout the house. But that's fair, it's an old house. Anyways, I was there with my class, and we were going around the house in groups. When my group of about 4 or 5 kids stopped at one of the rooms, one of the beds was pressed down like there was someone lying there, even the pillow was a little compressed. I didn't notice it at first until one of my classmates pointed it out, but what we all noticed was when the upper part of the bed suddenly became uncompressed, so it looked like someone was sitting on the edge of the bed. That decompressed as if something had stood up. We then heard creaking and booked it out of that vicinity. My brother visited Point Ellis House with his grades 4 or 5 class. Apparently a kid went missing and when they found him he said a nice man was showing him around the house. He then saw a picture of the man who owned the house when it was first built, a man named Peter O'Reilly, IIRC, and said, "That's him." Let me preface this by saying I still do not believe in ghosts. There must be some explanation, right? God, I hope so. I live in a Victorian house built in 1878. Historical documents we've found show that at least 8 people have passed into the house. Anyway, my room, used to be my parents' room, is the most active. The most common occurrence is bed shaking. This is not a violent shake, and it is also not some illusion caused by heartbeat or some such other thing. The bed will shake for around 30 seconds or so. After the bed shakes, you can usually bet that shortly after it stops, it will feel as though someone sits on the bed. It's always the same place as well. If you happen to be on the spot it will feel like a light, 5 pounds or so, bag has been placed on you. Occasionally you can also feel something touch your head, quite forcefully. That's the one that trips me out the most and is the most unexplainable to me. There are noises all the time and what sounds like footsteps every night, but I attribute that to an old house that makes noise. Hopefully? I had someone say that about an incident I witnessed one time, and I can almost bet it wasn't that. I was lying in my bed, and I heard something outside my bedroom door. I thought it was the cat. Then it started jiggling the doorknob. Still thought it was the cat at this point. Then my door flies open and there is nobody standing there. I hear footsteps walking around to the side of my bed and at this point I'm too scared to even yell. Then what feels like an average-size adult sits on my right leg. That's when I tried to nope out of there. My leg wouldn't move from that spot on the bed, and I struggled for what seemed to be minutes but was probably less than 1 minute. When it finally let up I was pulling on the opposite side of the bed so hard I crashed into the wall, fell to the floor, and ran out of the room like I was on fire. The craziest that happened in that house, and there was other stuff happening there but mostly cliché like voices, footsteps, cold spots, items coming up missing and being found in weird places, doors opening and closing, etc. Here's my story. When I was a child, I wanted to believe ghosts were real. I wanted to desperately prove that. For many years, I tried, but to no avail. Until I turned 18. By then, I did believe some things couldn't be explained, and was slowly losing hope. I worked in an aviary that had lovebirds, cockatiels, and budgies, equaling out to 500 total, roughly. Anyone who has dealt with breeding small parrots understands that some parents aren't exceptionally good to their chicks and will abandon them/abuse them. Of course, the parents were to be kept more as pets and were not allowed to breed, and so I would become the new mom. Take into consideration that feeding chicks is a lot like feeding a human baby. They will want to be fed even at night, for 2 to 4 hours intervals. One night I was lying in my bed and had said my pleasantries to my friends for the night. In my silence, I was recollecting some memories. My silence broke. I heard an odd gurgling sound. I figured it was the water bottle I kept for my little fledglings and thought nothing much. Dead silence flowed through the room, and I began to become a little alert from the oddness of it all. Again, the queer quietness was stolen. The sound was akin to gurgling/croaking. I have no idea how to really describe it. It just made my body go into flight/fight mode, and my hair stood on end. Honestly, it sounds like a cliché reaction, but it is true. I looked around and saw nothing. I decided my next course of action was to ask if anything was in the room. My little birds squeaked tiredly back, but nothing was seen/heard. I decided to take the next step and slam my foot against the bed. To my horror, I felt a force shove against my bed 4 seconds later. I was astounded and in shock. Nothing happened after that. 2 weeks later, I was walking into the kitchen and went to the fridge. Before I opened the door, that same noise was heard not 2 inches from my face. I don't remember grabbing anything from the fridge, but I do remember calmly walking back to my bedroom, where I noted for the rest of the night. A month later, in the middle of the day, I was talking to my friend on Skype. The door to my bedroom started shaking violently, and I screamed at my brother to knock it off. He yelled from the bedroom that it wasn't him, and I quickly opened the door. Nothing. How my brother could run silently to the living room in a second is beyond me. I can't explain it. I'm fairly sure my friend pooped his pants on the other end. I was happy that something happened in front of someone, and that I couldn't explain it. I have tons more experiences, but less violent/more explainable. I wish I were smart enough to record the other 2 events. There is a black silhouette of a man that will appear on occasion in my parents' house and has since we moved in when I was incredibly young. We call him Bob, because that was the name of the old guy who lived there, and died there, before my parents bought it. Everyone in my family, mom, dad, 6 siblings, has seen him multiple times, even the dogs bark at him. But he's never harmed anything. My mom swears he broke a cup once, but I'm fairly sure that it was a coincidence or something. But, yes, he checks up on us every once in a while. We'll be eating dinner or watching TV or whatever and there he'll be, just standing in the doorway to our dining room, that's his favorite room, watching us. However, when you do look at him, he drifts out of the room and goes up the stairs to the 2nd floor and then onwards to the attic stairs and then into the attic. The only bad part about that is that the attic stairs are next to my bedroom door, so I get to deal with the door slamming every time he goes up there. Also, when I'm stoned, I have to go through his favorite room to get munchies and I'm always terrified that he'll surprise me, and I'll get scared myself or something. When I was a kid my family lived in an old farmhouse surrounded by cornfields. That in itself is kind of awful, but my mom said she experienced a lot of different paranormal events in the house. It started with an upstairs light coming on as soon as she laid down for bed. She would hear screaming and whatnot from inside the house when she was in the garden. The thing that finally put her on the edge was a consistent night terror. After she would see my dad off to work early in the morning she would go back to bed for a few hours of sleep. Almost once a week she said that she would see a man in an old duster standing in the doorway to her room. She couldn't move and was essentially paralyzed with fear. I can't remember how she said he would disappear. It ended up giving her pretty bad anxiety attacks and we moved shortly after. I never experienced anything at all in this house as a kid. I still wish something would happen to me so I could believe it though. Back in 2009, while I was in the army, I lived in these really old army barracks. For some reason I would often hear a glass full of ice getting dropped on the tile floors in my room. I was the only one living there at the time. Now this would always happen at night, and it would always wake me out of my sleep. A few weeks later, I got a roommate. I never mentioned anything to him about this, but a few nights after moving in, he asked me if I heard weird things in the middle of the night, like a glass being dropped. All I can think about is, if this was something paranormal, why drop a glass of ice to the ground? All I could think of was that this was the last act of this person's life. What if they knew they were going to be killed, and dropped the glass of whatever they were drinking? Did this traumatic event in time engrave itself in my old barracks room? I swear that my first house was haunted. I have a few stories, but they're not really that great. I can tell them if you want. I also go to college in the 13th most haunted city on the planet according to Travel Channel and have some stories from there too. The best came from my friend who used to sleep over all the time. When he spent the night we'd sleep down in the family room in front of the TV on an inflatable mattress. No one else slept on the first floor of our house, so there was only a half bathroom right by the entryway across from the living/dining room. It was the kind of room where parents kept heirlooms, ate fancy holiday dinners, and was generally unused. Anyway, in this bathroom behind the sink was a huge mirror that, with the door open, you could see into the living room. One night this friend goes into the bathroom and does his thing. Afterwards, like a good kid, he washes his hands in the sink, but he forgot to shut the bathroom door. It was about 4 in the morning, and I woke up to him sprinting into the room we were sleeping in and tripping over me in bed. Apparently he looked up from washing his hands and behind him a woman was rocking back and forth in an antique rocking chair we had. He turned and started to say something to her since he thought it was my mom, but when he was facing the chair it was just rocking empty. That room always gave me the creeps and I never used that chair. There was a big pillow in it that pretty much kept anyone from sitting on it because only half of your butt would fit on the chair. We don't live there anymore, and I haven't spoken to the new residents since I feel like it'd be kind of weird. I would really like to ask if they feel anything strange there. I don't know if he has any relevance here. This happened to my dad while hunting. His friend Jay and him were hunting an elk in a snowfall. The snow was coming down heavy but in big cotton balls. They had been tracking this elk for almost 4 miles when they were closing in on it. As most hunters who travel in tandem do, Jay circled around to cut off the elk. If the elk were to come out they would get it. With more than 50 years of hunting between them they knew what they were doing. As my dad followed the steaming past trails and fresh prints he knew they were and knew that they were coming to a clearing. Got his bow ready and silently marched forth to what he thought was a sure thing. When he found the tracks, they just stopped. Startled, he looked all around him. Maybe the elk jumped into a bush or something. Nothing. He signaled his friend Jay to do a circle and try to see where it went. After Jay did the circle he reported nothing. So, my dad circled the area himself to no avail. To this day my dad doesn't know what happened. He showed me the spot. The story checks out with Jay. Signals with hands, aliens. I'll try to keep this from being a wall of text, but bear with me as it's still the abridged version of a 20-year history. I live in an old colonial type of house. Before my parents bought it in the early 1990s, it was owned by an old Italian couple. The house is somewhat old, and my dad immediately set out on renovating it to make it comfortable for a family of 6, with one more on the way. Over the course of several years, during which the majority of the house saw extensive changes, my parents experienced your generic spooky stuff. The kitchen in particular was at one point the center of attention for both my dad's construction and ghostly activity. When he first added new cabinets, they would wake to every single one open. Every now and then all the lights would be turned on in certain rooms. It was basically harmless stuff. Most of the activity has occurred in the past 9 years or so, with all but 2 being actual figures. The more prevalent figure is that of a woman in a dress, whom we have, in a fit of creativity, come to refer to as the ghost. Particular people in my family are prone to these settings: my mom, my sister, Kate, my brother, Mark, my sister-in-law, and me. These settings will be separated according to person. Mom, this November she saw a black, shadowy figure sitting on the bed of my brother, not Mark. Kate, her friend asked her who was the lady in the dress in the bathroom. Kate opened the door to an empty bathroom. Another time Kate saw the ghost standing at the foot of her bed around the time of our grandmother's death. Mark saw the ghost 4 times, all of which occurred on the 2nd floor. Sister-in-law, another one of my brothers, was diagnosed with a brain tumor a year back. The night before his final surgery to remove the tumor, my sister-in-law saw the ghost in the middle of the night watching over my brother. Prior to this, she did not know of the ghost's existence. At another time, the couple heard a loud crash come from the closet, but when they looked to see if anything had fallen, they found that nothing had been disturbed. Me, I've always felt uneasy in my own house, but I've had only 2 experiences. When I was younger, I saw the punching bag in Mark's room swing consistently for several minutes, though no window was open. This could be the result of a draft. I was 8 at the time. I was hanging out in my kitchen with a few friends when I heard a loud crash come from upstairs. It sounded as if something had fallen in the laundry room. When I checked it out, there was nothing out of place. When my current girlfriend first came over to my house, she felt incredibly uneasy. The same happened with 2 other friends at various times. Overall, we see the ghost as a good omen. As for the black, shadowy figure my mom saw in November, the jury's still out. I've had 2 separate experiences. When I was at college, I was in my bedroom. The building was modern, and so I was more caught off guard. I guess you expect ghosts to be chilling in old stone buildings and whatnot. I lived in Lincoln, UK, which is a fairly old historical city. I was lying in bed at night playing Pokemon Diamond. I was hunting for shinies. My friend had caught a shiny Spearow, and I was looking for something to counter it. I eventually came across a shiny Marie. Ignoring my slight excitement chubby, I started battle. It should have been a routine sleep and throw. I know now that things are never that simple. My haunter's hypnosis attack missed, and it countered with something paralyzing. For the next 3 turns, haunter couldn't move, so I just started lobbing pokeballs. An ultra ball caught it and hit the ground. It started to rock on the floor. 1, 2, 3, in the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. I looked up above my white DS light, and at the end of my bed was a figure. It was a woman, all in black, just staring. I stared back silently, brain frozen over, much like the path to Snowpoint City. Without looking away, I fell for the light switch. And hit the light. For some reason I assumed that this would make her go away. It didn't. I shouted, jumped out of bed, and ran. My housemates were all awake in the living room, and they were super concerned. We went back to my room and there was nothing there. I got mocked for the rest of the year. Roll on 4 years and I'm living on my own in China. Nanchang in the winter gets cold and lonely, so being the social butterfly that I am, I decided to buy a bird from the old pet market. The guy gave me a fairly good deal on a majestic baguette. I don't know what the English name is. He assured me that I would be able to train the bird to talk. It didn't take long for the bird to become used to me, and eventually, it would happily sit on my head/hand/shoulder. But it would never talk. I named it Boromir after the most important character in the whole of The Lord of the Rings. As the winter went on, things started to get a bit strange. One night, I was sitting watching Arrested Development, when suddenly the bird started to laugh. Not that weird, right? Everyone laughs at Arrested Development. But this laugh was creepy. It started high and then got lower like H.A. Herg. A moment later, there was a banging on my door. I opened it, and a Chinese man started shouting at me. I had no idea what he was saying, so in typical Chinese fashion, he barged into my flat. He walked over to the balcony. One that I had never even bothered to open, and started shouting at me. I walked over. The balcony, even though it was locked up, was flooded. An outside tap was fully turned on, and water was pouring all down the side of the building. He had to go and get a key. Turns out he was maintenance, opened the balcony, and turned the tap off. It took a while, as the tap had been twisted so tight that it was stuck. In the background, Boromir just laughed. The second time I heard this laugh, I wasn't alone. Another foreign teacher from Holland was sitting with me. We were both drinking whiskey and listening to music. Suddenly Herg. Herg, herg. We watched as the knob on the stereo turned on its own. First all the way up. Then all the way down. At the time I didn't make the connection with the laughing and the weirdness. We were both pretty unnerved. One night, I brought a girl back with me. She was scared of birds, so I locked Boromir in his cage, and covered the cage with a thick blanket. We went to bed, and I closed the bedroom door. She got a headache, and we went to sleep. I could hear the bird laughing through the cage, and through the wooden door. We woke up banging on the door. This time it was the bedroom door. Someone was in my apartment. The girl started to panic in the way that girls do when there's an intruder. So, I grabbed something heavy, and went over to the door. I pulled it open. At first I thought there was no one there. Then I looked down. Boromir was at my feet, silently staring. The girl didn't come back, and at this point, I decided the bird had to go. I put it back in the cage and found a friend who said he would take it. I had to wait a few days. The final night. I was in bed, and I heard the laughing again. I was filled with dread and waited for something to happen. Nothing did, and I fell asleep. I woke up to my bedroom door slamming. And I woke up. There was someone in my room. She was speaking to me in a very hurried fashion, but there was no sound. She wasn't scary like the Lincoln lady, she was scared. She ran out of my room, and I followed, hitting as many light switches as possible. And then she was gone. The birdcage was empty, but I could hear the laughter. It was coming from my bedroom. I went back in, and sitting on top of my lamp was Boromir. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I took Boromir to my friend's place. I had told him everything honestly, and he was still eager to have the bird. And this is the part of my story that seems the most far-fetched, but I swear down, it happened. I gave the bird to my friend, and as I was going to leave, in a little voice I heard "I'll miss you, ha ha herg herg herg." That's the end. The bird escaped from my friend's house a few months after that and was never heard from again. I lived in a haunted house. Yes, ghosts aren't real, you must have imagined them, etc., 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 but I know what I saw, anyway. This was an old farmhouse in rural Norway that always had a reputation for being haunted. The house belonged to my, now ex-wife's family, no one was staying there, it was her uncle's summer cottage, and we needed a place to stay, so we used it. It was actually an amazingly comfortable place nestled in a valley on a fjord. We brought our cat with us from the US when we moved as well. I loved it there. Everything was pretty normal for the first couple of months, but that's when the voices started. At first, they were indistinguishable, just the muffled noises of women talking, easy enough to dismiss, but things got more intense. One night, the lights came on in the kitchen, we could smell food cooking, and there were women talking in there. Now, I should note that she had kind of a nosy family that would just show up whenever they felt like it, but this was 3 a.m. I was angrier than freaked out. I got up and headed towards the kitchen, still hearing the voices. The voices stopped as soon as I started to open the door to the kitchen, and I opened the door and went inside. The lights were still on, the oven was turned off but warm, there was a smell of food in the air, and no one there. Things started to get more sinister after that. There were screams in the cellar and the attic, usually in the middle of the night, and the cat was getting to increase agitated as time went on, acting like she could see things that weren't there, chasing things that were invisible, hissing at thin air. This led up to the event that had us nope right out of there. We woke up to the cat making this horrid howl/screeching noise in the living room. I went to see what's happening and didn't see her right away, but there she was, my white, fluffy blue-eyed cat, standing on the ceiling in complete defiance of gravity. Eyes glowing red in the country moonlight, and howling. My wife came out and saw this too and screamed. The cat stopped howling and just stared at us. Then the cat opened her mouth and said, "Get out," in Norwegian, in the voice of an old woman. As soon as the words were uttered, the red glow faded from her eyes, she fell from the ceiling, on the floor, got up, and acted like nothing happened. We slept at her parents' that night and moved out the next day. That was enough. I'm fairly sure my apartment is haunted. Specifically, my room. My bedroom door will open and shut on its own, even when all the windows in the apartment are closed. This only happened once, but the heat pipe in my room shook so violently that chips of paint flew off of it. I know pipes shake when the heat is on, but this wasn't normal. It was like someone was standing in my roommate's room, we live in a duplex, and ringing it like they were trying to choke out the pipe from above. One time my roommate and I were watching TV, and we both heard whistling but didn't say anything. Finally, I was like, "Can I pause the TV for a sec?" And we sat there in silence, and both heard whistling again. We looked at each other, horrified, and I texted our next-door neighbor to ask if she was home, and she said everyone in their apartment was gone for the weekend. Then we turned the TV up really loud and tried to forget it happened. I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but we looked up that a girl who died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire lived in our building when she died. But it's a pretty old walk-up, so I'm sure there are plenty of potential ghosts roaming these halls. Also, my mom refused to change the hideous wallpaper in the master bedroom in the house I grew up in, built in the late 1800s old Victorian-style house, because she swears the previous owners, spinster sisters, one of whom died in the house, came to her in a dream and threatened her after she brought in a designer to redo the room. Oh, yes. My father's house. My father and I recently got back in touch, and I have moved back in with him. I have been experiencing, for lack of a better word, a kind of presence in his house. It has been growing increasingly powerful, first just a slight feeling of being watched, of noises and objects being moved around the house, and now I am unable to sleep. I originally moved back in using my brother's old room, as he had moved out a while ago. I always got horrible feelings in that room that never allowed me to sleep. I eventually just got another room and the feelings more or less stopped. This has all started and escalated within the past 2 or 3 weeks. But I am no stranger to paranoia, and living in this giant log cabin in the woods, it would have certainly originally been possible to write it off as just nerves from a creepy house. I honestly started believing that I was starting to go crazy. But with these events growing in such strength and history, I now believe if there really were spirits in this house, there is more than one. Anyways, it started out with me surfing Reddit one night. Out of nowhere I get this nasty feeling that someone is in the room. I can't really describe it, just an unwelcome feeling. At the same time, the objects in our living room, so to speak, started violently shaking for just a second. The TV, the couch, the rack of DVDs, everything in that confined area just started rattling, then there was a bang and it all stopped. That was the first night. Over the next few nights things started to get worse. I started feeling as if I was being watched, like somebody was standing by the table. Still a very unwelcome feeling, as if at any moment someone would jump out and come after me. Eventually this feeling worsened, and after a couple of weeks I was feeling it every second I was in that house. The noises grew as well. I'd hear footsteps or feel the vibrations of thudding feet throughout the house in the middle of the night. They started in the back area where the TV and memorial sections of the house are, eventually branched out to the whole main floor. After another week or so I realized footsteps were following me around the house. One memorable night, I was working on homework and the footsteps walked right up to me and stopped. I wigged out a little and decided to call it an early night. After I went upstairs to my room, the thudding footsteps continued downstairs. Then I heard them going up the stairs and into my room, walked right over to the edge of my bed and stopped again. I didn't sleep that night either. This was back before I moved into the good room, and one of the tipping points that made me move out again. It always seemed to be when I was by myself that the activity really kicked off. My father and stepmother went out of town one weekend, and that whole weekend was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I'd be sitting at the computer watching some politics or surfing YouTube, petting my cat, and suddenly we heard a loud slide and a bang from the memorial section of the house, full of antique furniture and belongings that we've inherited from recently deceased loved ones. The cat started freaking out. We went to investigate. I found an old antique candle holder laying sideways on top of the bookshelf. Don't know how it got there. I called my sister and her boyfriend over, we got drunk and played games and all was well. So, it all kind of kicked off one night when I had to pick up my stepmother from a concert. She got very drunk, and she tends to reveal some pretty personal stuff when she drinks. We went home, and suddenly she completely broke down with me and started telling me all of the paranormal experiences that have been happening to her. Really unexpected moment, we entered the house, and she just broke down and started talking about how this house is a portal. Note that I have not spoken to either of them about these events, as I was afraid I wouldn't be taken seriously. She described the evil presence I've been feeling as well. Sometimes it would be so powerful that she was too afraid to move. She would not leave her bedroom without my father by her side. She also explained the temporary visitations of her recently deceased mother and brother, who had only stopped by to let her know everything was okay and to not worry about them. It turns out that before I moved in, she got so wigged out by the bad presence that she walked out to the main room and screamed to leave her alone. It immediately stopped, but then I moved in, and that is when I started to experience the same phenomena. So, after some talking, we decided to split the cost for an EVP recorder, which I still need to pay half for. It took about 2 or 3 weeks to arrive, and right after we decided to order it, and it went up to 11. I was never able to sleep on the days that I stayed there. The cat was constantly freaked out, always felt followed. I heard tapping on the windows at night and in the morning, and the very night before the EVP recorder arrived I finally started seeing apparitions, if you can call them that. I get the feeling of someone watching me from a specific area in the house, and when I turned to look I'd see the shadows start to move by themselves. I fell asleep on the couch that night, as I had become accustomed to, and in the glass door I'd see the reflection of full silhouette of a man walking around in the room. I couldn't see anything actually in the room, but his reflection was there. I was making ramen the other day. Earlier I tried after my stepmother and had demanded that any spirits in the house stop messing around and show themselves to me, and evil spirits were not welcome. As I was about to add the chicken flavor to the noodles, the cat was walking in front of me and suddenly stopped, looking up at some spot right behind me. Simultaneously, I felt a feeling of pure terror, and the cat suddenly reared up, arching its back, and puffing out its fur with tail out, the standard frightened cat pose. But even though the cat's eyes got all wide and he dropped his jaw, it looked like the cat was trying to scream. As silly as it sounds, I've never seen a cat with such a human-like expression on its face. I didn't know they could even make that expression. But as it was staring right behind me, I've never seen a cat so terrified, and I'm not sure if I've ever felt such fear either. All I can remember is believing I was about to be violently attacked. But the feeling passed as quickly as it came. The cat went back to normal as he and I were just stuck in a what just happened look. The cat was anxious for a while after that, and there was later a loud bang near the memorial section of the house. Nothing since that. I got some voices on an EVP recorder, but I've been too lazy to post them. My GF and I moved into an apartment complex, a bunch of 4-plex buildings. Not too long after we moved in we got our first dog. All was well for a few weeks. After about a month having the dog, I was walking her outside and a little kid walked up, around 7 years old. He said his name was Owen, and asked if he can pet the dog. Of course, I didn't think anything of it and said yes. He then asks if he can hold her. I figured why not. Owen then picked up our dog, squeezed her as hard as he could, instantly causing the dog to squeal. I told him that was not okay, and he shouldn't treat animals like that. I know this is not scary yet, bear with me. A couple of days later, while I was at home, I heard a knock on the door. It's Owen. He asks if the puppy can come out to play. I tell him she is sleeping, and he then asks for some candy. We keep a candy bowl on the coffee table, in plain sight. I say sure, but make sure it's okay with his mother before he comes back. This happens 3 or 4 more times over the next few weeks. Around lunchtime one day, Owen shows up. He asks for candy while holding a yellow wiffle, spelling, ball bat. I tell him I'm all out of candy and he should go home. Owen then responds, you had best have candy when I come back, or we are going to get you. He was alone. I closed the door and moved the candy bowl into the next room out of sight. In about 15 minutes, I heard the door open and storm door slam shut. Owen, without missing a beat, walks in and takes candy, as if he knew where I moved the bowl to. Says nothing and then leaves. I chased him out and told him not to come back, and I proceeded to ask him where he lives. He points to his place, and I make a mental note to go down there at a later time with my wife. She wears the pants in the relationship, tongue sticking out. When the missus got home, we both walked down to the apartment. I watched Owen enter. And no one is there, it's empty. According to the office, that unit had been empty for some time and any tenant would only stay for a few months before breaking their contract. Over the next few weeks, the dog and the cat go nuts. The dog would sit and growl at the corner behind the front door. For hours she would watch the corner. The cat would go crazy if any doors were shut, scratching at them, shoving his face into them trying to open them. About 2 months after the initial Owen sighting, GF and I are driving home late at night, maybe 11 p.m. or so. We turn the corner and there Owen is, on a big wheel, stares right at us. Points at us and follows us with his finger as we round a turn. Park the car. And he is gone. Since then, we have moved to a new location, but for the year we were at the apartment, the dog and cat never stopped hating doors and corners. We often heard creaking doors and saw reflections in the windows. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this out. Bar none the creepiest experience I have ever had. I was just a kid, 9 years old, and I certainly didn't believe in ghosts. I was raised strictly Christian and the closest thing to ghosts my family believed in was demons, and it was a brand new house, just built, never lived in a new development. But we moved in on Halloween night. It started out like the sort of thing you could explain away. Loud creaks, doors slamming, sudden drafts that didn't seem to have a source. Things you would expect in an old cliched horror house, sure, but not a new one like ours. Then, I was home alone one day. Sitting at the family computer, a single footstep sounded down the hall. And then a few more, sounding gradually closer. I assumed my parents had come home, or my sister, or anyone, and I called out, but there was nothing. I grabbed the phone and ran to our basement. After a call to my mother showed me that nobody was supposed to be in the house but me, I convinced her I had to have imagined it, but I swear, those steps were as plain as day. None of those things compared to our basement, though. My younger sister and I played there, but the unfinished level had some faulty lighting, maybe, and the lights often flickered or went out. Whenever they did, we'd run upstairs quick, but never without catching a glimpse of the man we called the trench coat man, a tall, shadowy man in what appeared to be a trench coat and hat ducking behind some unfinished sheetrock. There were more stories. Friends who, unprompted, mentioned a similar-looking figure in the basement, one crisis involving a girl trapped in a cabinet, and other things, but I was constantly trying to convince myself I was imagining it. I was a highly logical child. Everything had to be math and science for me, and ghostly activities sounded like something my eyes invented or my brain mistook. My parents, Christian as they were uncomfortable when I brought it up, and as I got older, I tried to forget about it. Even now, more than a decade later though, I can remember with perfect clarity my most vivid example of ghostly activity. I'd gone to fetch something from our basement, retrieved it, turned around, and walked back towards the stairs, which were located next to a pile of junk, an old microwave, some books, other old things. The instant I turned around, I saw her. A woman with beautiful, shiny, long, golden hair, sitting cross-legged atop our old microwave, smiling, looking in the opposite direction, and running her fingers through her hair. She was completely transparent. I stopped completely and stared. I blinked. I pressed my fingers on my eyes until I saw those light flashes. I tilted my head to other angles. But she was still there, looking out the basement window near the ceiling and flipping her hair, and I could read, through her, the piece of construction paper I'd taped up on the wall on the other side of her body. Whenever I look back on those memories and think I must have just been an imaginative kid, I remember that woman and realize that there absolutely had to be something I just couldn't explain. I don't believe my mother's house is haunted. Nothing ever strange happened there except for one time. I was woken up from my sleep in the middle of the night by what I thought was my little sister. No one had said anything or touched me in any way to wake me up, but that feeling you get when someone is just standing in the room staring at you. You can feel their presence. Well, that's what woke me up, the presence of a little girl. It was pitch black so I couldn't see a thing, but I could feel someone there and it felt like it could be my little sister, but whoever was there was angry. The malevolent presence of a young girl. I asked quietly, "Mari, what are you doing in here?" I got no response, just felt that angry presence. I told myself I was imagining things, but I was paralyzed with fear by this point. It was incredibly angry, and I felt it pretty heavily. After a few minutes I convinced myself that it had to be my younger sister who was absolutely furious with me or perhaps was sleepwalking and I was working myself into a fit for no reason. Then suddenly, I was struck in the crotch, not too hard, but definitely hard enough to be from an angry 14-year-old. Moaning why a little louder than I should have, wondering why my little sister wanted to punch me in the junk. I turned on the light only to find no one was standing there and the door was shut quite tightly. Utterly confused I went to check on my mother and my sister and both were sound asleep. I didn't go back to sleep that night. That's the only strange thing that ever happened. I don't know if it were a ghost, it could have easily been my mind playing tricks on me, even making me believe I got punched I guess, but it always felt like it was a ghost to me. I wish I could believe all of these. I desperately want to believe, because then that means that there is an afterlife, and if ghosts can exist, then why not other supernatural things, like magic? But I can't. It's not that I don't believe that these people are genuinely telling the truth, I believe that they think what they're saying is real. It's just my cynical, logical mind cannot accept it. My mother has a friend who swears she can see ghosts. And she isn't preachy about it or pretends to be a medium, she's just a normal person who, almost as an afterthought, can see ghosts. And I really wish I could believe her. Because then that means my grandfather is still out there somewhere and not just extinguished from existence. My mother swears blind she once went to a medium as a joke once and she accurately described the circumstances of my grandfather's death and correctly guessed the name of my stillborn uncle, who was never officially named and whom my mother didn't even mention. And I believe that she believes what she says, but it's more likely she unknowingly gave away minute details and that woman was legitimate. I guess until something supernatural occurs to me personally to change my mind, that would be proof enough for me I guess, I am doomed to live in cold, hard reality. My grandmother died in the house I live in right now. I'm fairly sure she hangs out with us every once in a while. One time my mom was doing a general cleanup of the house, she was so tired that she fell asleep at 7 p.m. I was the only one awake at that time. I heard furniture moving and lights going on and off. The next day I noticed all the broken clocks we had were set to 4:13. My mom didn't do it. I didn't do it either. My mom and I were the only people at that time. Another time I was browsing through some 4chan bad thread, and I saw eyes staring at me. My grandmother was short. The eyes were glowing red and 8.5 feet above the ground. I just realized this now. I'm scared. Hug me Reddit. Also, after that I continued fapping and it disappeared. Ghosts get disgusted by masturbation too. I should preface this by saying I still don't believe in ghosts. I would love to, but I've never encountered evidence sufficient enough to change my mind or experienced anything myself. Nevertheless, I live in a house where an older woman died in our back room. My wife and I call her the widow. On various occasions, according to my wife, the widow has turned off running faucets while she was using them, turned on and off lights in rooms she was sitting in, and walked through the dark in our house at night. Again, I've never seen any of this myself. We asked an expert about it once, and she said the ghost doesn't reveal herself to me because I don't believe in her. Well, that's convenient, isn't it? I used to live in an old house built in the late 1800s. The basement was all dirty, and if you looked up at the ceiling there were actual tree trunks put to hold the floor up. I remember when we first moved in there was a closet and in the back was a small wooden door or hatch. I opened it and couldn't see very well in there because it was too dark. I got a flashlight but there was no floor on the other end and seemed just like a big hole. I didn't think of it much until later when my school went to visit the town library about the Underground Railroad and my house was part of it. I asked one of the librarians about what I found, and she said it could have been where they hid slaves. Pretty awesome I thought. Anyways, before all that, weird things constantly happened in the house. There are so many stories I could talk about but for the sake of space I'll just tell you 5 of them. 1. I had a Super Nintendo at this time, and I had left the controller just hanging. The system sat on top of the entertainment center which was high enough for the controller to hang and not touch the ground. Well, my dad and I were sitting there, he was reading the paper, I was doing homework when all of a sudden the controller swung from left to right a few times and then stopped as if someone grabbed it, swung it, and then grabbed it again to stop it. 2. I was sleeping in the living room one night and around 12 or so I began hearing a high-pitched noise. I sat up and tried to listen carefully. It was getting louder and clearer. Eventually I understood it. It sounded like a group of kids screaming, "Mommy! Why oh mommy why?" Freaked me. I called for my mother in the room and asked her if she could hear it. Her, being an extreme Christian lady, tried to say it was something else. But I could tell when she first came out of her room, her jaw dropped, and I could see the horror in her face. 3. Upstairs was my room, and it was the biggest room in the house, but you had to walk through my room to get to the other rooms. After you walk through my room, there's a small hallway which splits off into 2 separate rooms. No one was up there with me at that time. In the hallway, I heard someone walking because the floor would creak at times. I stood up to look, but I didn't see anything. A few minutes later I heard it again and stood there watching. I could actually see the floorboards move as if someone were stepping on them. Later that day my grandfather came over and he slept in the room down the hall. He woke up in the middle of the night and came to my room to wake me up and told me the dresser in the room lifted up and came back down. I went with him to the room and looked and we figured out it was one of the floor panels in the hallway. When you step on it the dresser would move. Well, everyone was asleep that night, so whoever it was I heard earlier and saw the floorboards move, was walking the hall again that night. 4. Again, in my room, one night I was lying in bed, had the lights off and the hall light was on, so this way here in the middle of the night I could see to go downstairs to use the bathroom. As I'm lying there I felt something at the foot of my bed. When I looked there was a dark shadow. Now the room is already dark, but it was lit dimly from the hallway light, but this part at the foot of my bed roughly the size of a person was standing there, and I felt like I was being watched. After what seemed like 5 minutes, it started to fade away. Before it was fully gone I heard something barely whisper my name, Christopher. Freaked me out yet again. I turned my light on but saw nothing. 5. Last but not least, not the greatest story, but my brother and I were in our living room watching TV. Now at this time I've seen and heard things, but my brother had not. We were sitting there and out of the corner of my eye I saw something dark slowly walk by the open doorway of the adjacent room. I thought it was just me, but my little brother freaked out and screamed, "Did you see that?" He ran to our mother and kept telling her he saw someone walk by the door, but of course she shrugged it off. I lived in a house in college with 5 other guys. Myself and at least 2 other of the roommates had multiple experiences of being alone in the house and distinctly hearing the voice of another roommate. It was a different roommate for each of us, speaking to us from the kitchen. It was really unnerving to be sure no one was in the house, then hear someone, and investigate to discover there was still no one left in the house but yourself. There were some other things that were creepy that happened, but the voices were the only things that couldn't be explained by anything normal. Not really a haunted house story, but one time about 3 years ago, I was asleep in my room when I was woken up by this strange noise. I could hear what sounded like music coming from my closet. I got up and looked to see what it was. I saw my iPod at full brightness playing the song Nike Boots by Whale. I don't have that song on my iPod BTW, my iPod was buried underneath my clothes, and I remember putting my phone on the charger that night by my bed. My closet is a walk-in closet that is in my bathroom. I know no one could have moved it because both my parents were out of town. Still freaks me out whenever I talk about it. I did when I was young. I was about 5 to 6 years old, give or take. It was an old house. We moved there because it was pretty cheap. At first there were random cold spots even in the summer. This was in northern Idaho, and we had no air conditioner, so there was no way that there could be any reason for cold spots. 7 months after we moved in, we started hearing heavy boots tromping up and down the stairs. My mother accused me and my brother of doing it to scare her. She finally believed us after we panicked and ran into her room to hide. We said it wasn't us. She got this angry look on her face, and just as she was about to start yelling, thump, scraped slowly coming up the stairs. Mind you, she was single at the time and rather small, and me and my brother were incredibly young, so there was no one living there that could possibly have made that sound. Things also had a habit of disappearing indoors, would occasionally slam shut without anyone touching them. After about a year and a half, you couldn't walk around the house without feeling that someone or something was watching you. Finally, my mother had enough, and we bailed the hell out of there back to my grandpa's place. Found out later that a miner who lived in that house had killed himself after his wife divorced him. Since one of my best friends lived not too far away from that house, I would pass by it every other day or so. About 2 months or so after moving out, I just happened to look up at the upstairs window, incidentally, my former room, and saw some shadowy movement. I freaked out and ran off towards my friend's house and told him what I saw. Neither of us ever went near that house again. Not me, but my uncle. He was staying in his college frat house after everyone had left for winter break, just him and his dog. In the middle of the night, he woke up to his dog barking at the door and the noise of a wild party. Confused, he ran to the door and, as soon as he opened it, everything stopped, just darkness and silence. It happened a few times that night, and he was freaked out. My granddad is convinced his childhood home was haunted. One time he says he walked outside, and the ground had fallen in at this one spot of his backyard and formed a perfect coffin shape. Also, things such as all the blinds in the house snapping up at once and other sorts of standard ghost occurrences. Not so much an experience with a haunted house, but being followed by a dark figure throughout my life. My mom has been followed as well, but that's a different story. My experiences started before I could remember, but the visits must have stopped for a while because when I told my mom about the first encounter that I was old enough to remember, she said that when I was around 4 I talked about a tall shadow visiting my bedside at night. She said she nailed the windows shut in the house and put security locks on all of the doors, but I still talked about this figure. Fast forward a few years and I began being visited again. When I was 21 to 23, it was really bad. Several visits several nights scared me, and to make it worse, I couldn't leave electronics in my room or weird things would happen. Like my unplugged, non-battery operated radio would turn on to static. My TV would turn on to a static station, so I had to keep it unplugged as well. The weirdest electrical occurrence was when my phone would call people on its own. I get people calling me at weird times asking if I'd called them when I didn't, and my phone history showed that I didn't make the call either. But when we compared histories, their phones showed that I had called when they said I did, but didn't. These calls only happened when I left my phone in my room, and it's important to say that I'm an only child and was living with my mom at the time, so it wasn't like someone was messing around with it when I left it unattended. Paranormal Activity is a freaking joke movie, but I still got chills watching it because I remembered what it was like to experience similar events, minus being possessed by a demon spirit. Many years ago, my mom bought a restaurant that had already been in business for 20 years. It was in an incredibly old house right next to a 200-year-old church. There were many rumors about a lot of serious stuff that had happened in that church, like torture and even deaths. Weird stuff. Anyway, I moved into the restaurant's upper floor. There were 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a patio. My mom always liked the color blue, so she painted the walls of the restaurant all blue. There was this one spot where the paint wouldn't dry. It would just continue to be wet, so she would paint it over and over. Finally, my uncle broke the wall to see if there was a pipe leaking or something, but there was nothing. So, the wall got fixed and painted again. The spot continued to be wet, and some kind of mold started to form. After a while we could see the perfect shape of a face formed by the mold. It had pointy ears, fangs, evil-looking eyes, a pair of horns and some kind of trident. It was really weird and scary. Soon after I started hearing loud bangs upstairs while I was in my room at night and alone. I was the only one living there at the time. Everyone else would just come during the day. One day my best friend spent the night, and in the morning he complained that I was scraping the outside of his door and calling his name. I did no such thing. Then as time went by I started hearing people walking by my room and also knocking on my door. I used to sleep with a huge chef knife. I was so scared. I would go to school at night, college, and turn all the lights off, but the one in the bathroom upstairs. As soon as I got out of the house and walked across the street I would look, and the light would be off. When I got back from school it would be on again, sad face. One night I was downstairs by myself, and the door handle started shaking violently. I got a knife and ran to the door and opened it really fast. There wasn't a soul on the street. There was an old lady, old customer, that saw a little girl and a little boy under the stairs once. She said they were ghosts and that they disappeared into thin air right in front of her. So that's my story. It was a really scary time in my life and my mom didn't believe me even though she thought the demon-like image on the wall was creepy. She chose to deny. More sad things happened to me there, but I'm not comfortable writing or telling anyone, as even writing these few episodes have me shaking on my seat and looking behind my shoulder. I'm 34 now and that happened when I was around 16 or 17. Thanks for reading. Sorry for typo and bad grammar. I'm tired. The previous owner of our house passes away peacefully in his sleep here in an upstairs room. Alden was somewhat of a recluse and a curator of a San Francisco museum in his later days. Alden is still here. He is a rather recluse spirit as well. Do not see him much, but every so often upstairs in the living room you feel somebody up there. Not necessarily watching you, just there. Sometimes there's a shadow passing by down the hall, but just in a passing by manner. I don't think he wants to be seen, but I have seen him a few times in the hallway. This is his house originally, so I do not blame him for sticking around. He spends most of his time here. He is still here because even home alone, there is an ever-present feeling of another entity in the house, maybe right around the corner. But he doesn't bother us, we don't bother him, and we can all live happily in this house, so it's all good. Didn't live there, but I told a story a while back about a close friend of mine's house. Currently my whose house I crash at a lot, has informed me his house is also haunted. They actually had it saved after a few incidents, but he claims that only got rid of the evil ghost they all felt, not the rest of them. They see a little boy a lot in the basement, but otherwise have a normal case of a haunted house. They hear voices, knocking, lights go on off, etc. In the mid-90s I lived in a house on Infantry Terrace on the Presidio of San Francisco. The base had just been turned over to the NPS, actually, Presidio Trust, but for the immediate future some of the housing was being set aside for DoD personnel and their families that were in the SF Bay Area. It being cheaper than paying BAH for the Bay Area. Anyway, I was the oldest kid in high school, and I got the entire top floor to myself. It was the servants' quarters with a bedroom, full bath, an area where I had my bookcase. House was old. It made noises. Occasionally shadows would be cast that made it look like people were inside moving around when there wasn't anyone there. This was made worse by the fact that homeless people kept looking into windows or sleeping on the porch because this is a park, am not it? We had some neighbors whose house seemed to be arbitrarily picked for young couples that wanted to have a picnic on their lawn a lot, who wanted to break in and see how their tax dollars were being spent. So, it was plenty of scary with ghosts. Then my door started to open by itself. The handle would come down, door would be pushed open. I would peer into the stairwell, but nothing was there. There was no overhead light, and my room wasn't well lit as it was. Scared me. After many months we figured it out. Turned out it was my tuxedo cat, who figured out how to open doors and would lay down on her white fur. The house I currently live in used to be my grandmother's. I have had a few odd experiences. I was in the bathroom rocking the deuce and I heard my bedroom door slam. It was the middle of winter and there's no possibility that it was a draft. I used to hear footsteps walking up the stairs a lot. It's a very distinct creaking noise that the stairs make when being walked on. Also, when I'm in the basement I used to hear footsteps upstairs, and I'm talking about heavy footsteps. I am convinced that the picture was haunted by a picture. My mom visited one summer and took the picture back to Florida with her. Nothing creepy has happened after that. I was going to try and show her who I thought might be haunting the house. It was an incredibly old picture of my family from the early 1900s. When I went to visit Florida over Christmas break 2 years ago, my mom and I went through the box that she had all of the pictures in, but we couldn't find the picture. It's not at my house and it isn't there. This thing seemed to just have vanished. I am being 100% serious about all of this. Please don't think I'm crazy. I don't think my house is haunted, but I have experienced some unexplained phenomena. One incident that stands out in my mind was when I was about 4 or 5. I was sleeping in my little bed and my window was open, which let in a lot of moonlight. I woke up in the middle of the night and opened my eyes to look up at the ceiling. I turned over to my left and I was frozen with fear from what I saw. It was a very tall, exceptionally large figure standing by my bed with my mom's old brown blanket covering itself, just standing there motionless, but looking away from me. I was so scared, I buried my face under my bed sheets and fell asleep instantly. I asked both of my parents and my sister if they did it, even though I knew they weren't as big as that figure, and they denied any involvement. My mom said she lost the blanket that night and never saw it again. I think about it every now and then, but I still don't know what it was. Most of my experiences I can attribute to sleep paralysis. Like a lady in white coming out of the bathroom in the old dorm I stayed at back in high school, hearing high-pitched female screams in both my ears, etc. One of the weirdest though was when I went home during high school break. I went to a high school located in a different province, and arrived a bit late in the evening though my family was still awake. I ate my dinner, said goodnight, and went to sleep. Now I share a room with my brother and the room is located on the second floor of our house. Anyway, I was woken up by a woman singing outside. In the middle of the night. Because I just got out of sleep I couldn't think straight, and I thought it was just the neighbors singing karaoke or something. Then I realized they couldn't be that loud because the nearest neighbors were probably 100 m away or more from our house. What's even weirder was that, apart from how close the singing woman was, it sounded like she was on the same floor/level as our bedroom. All the other houses were bungalows. I'm a rather paranoid person. I make sure that every single door and window is securely locked and then I lock my own bedroom door when I go to bed even though I'm home alone. So, I'm lying in bed with my headphones and iPod when I feel my bed mattress being pushed down to one side, which also gave me that awful mini heart attack you get when you dream that you fell/tripped. When I looked up I saw the pitch-black silhouette of a tall man looming over me. There were no facial features or details anywhere. It was like a solid shadow staring at me from my bedside, and he was wearing a chapeau. I named him David. So, when I was 4 I lived in England. My parents decided to move somewhere more spacious due to my brother being born, and that was a huge mistake. So we moved to this house. It was a 3-story house including the basement, and it was really old, like over 100 years old, and people did die in that house, but not many, and also it used to be a bar or something. But anyway, maybe after 2 months living there I started having vivid dreams of a man in a top hat standing in my room telling me wonderfully funny jokes. His name was John. So anyway, around the 5th month mark I was in my bed dozing off when I hear my name being called, but in a whispery voice. So I shuffle to sit up, and there a man and a little boy standing at the end of my bed smiling at me. I was frozen with fright at the time and couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear of not knowing what was going to happen, but luckily nothing did, and the apparitions faded away into thin air. About 2 years later, when I was 7, I woke up randomly downstairs kneeling on the edge of the windowsill, so I shouted to my mom to come get me. She asked me what happened, but I didn't know for some reason. But anyway, the following day I come home from school greeted by my mother asking, "Have you seen anything recently?" And I said yes and told her about the apparitions and the man called John telling me funny jokes. And she just stood there mouth gaping like she knew as well, and it turned out she did. Because that day she witnessed a man in a top hat walking through our living room, and she just got hit with a lost memory of a man called John for no reason. My parents were worried about me because I wouldn't sleep or eat because of the apparitions and dreams which kept on coming back, so they called a doctor who recommended some well-earned rest, which didn't work anyway. So my parents called my grandmother, who was a religious woman and could, I guess, talk to ghosts as well as help them move on, so basically a modern-day ghost whisperer. So she came and asked me about the man John without knowing anything, which surprised me, but anyway she did her thing. And told us that John had a son who had died in the house and needed to go with his father to a better place. So, my nan called her friends, and they did their stuff, and John's son went with him. They didn't record anything, just a couple of voice phenomenon which were deleted because they were not voices, just bumps and creaks due to the age of the house. 1 year later we moved, and as we packed the duo and started driving away I looked back and there was the boy sitting on the windowsill as I did, and he looked at me and smiled and I did the same, and I never saw them again. Also, while in the house weird things happen, like flies would come and just land in the palm of my hand and sit there for ages until I brushed them off. They wouldn't budge, they would just sit there. But that's my ghost story. I used to live in a house where 2 people died with 4 friends of mine. One night we are downstairs in the living room chilling out and one of my friends decides to go to bed. Fair enough. Our friend's room is right above the living room and my room is directly across the landing from his. Around 2 hours later, myself and my other 2 housemates hear someone running, and I mean seriously running, right above us in our friend's room, then into the landing, and then we hear a door slam. We freeze for a moment and then decide to go check it out. We go upstairs and my friend's door is closed and so is mine. I never closed my door fully because it was hung slightly off and it was tight to the carpet. I just used to close it as tight as I could. We freak and go check on my friend in his room who was fast asleep. We have to hit him to get him to wake up. When we explain what happened, he is laughing at us, so we ask him to go into my room. We don't know what is in there. So, we pitch behind him, and he casually opens the door and flicks the light on. Nothing there. Was so weird. He goes back to bed, and we go back downstairs to smoke more J. Never happened again after that. My wife and I just moved into a brand new house this past July. There are definitely creaks and weird noises from the house settling. However, I had a friend over one night. We all had a little drunk and as we were going to bed, my friend jokingly knocked on our bedroom door and asked if he could sleep in our bed because there is a ghost in his room. Go to bed, Rodney. I speak. The next day, after he went home, he told me his girlfriend asked him, "So, you called me last night?" He didn't remember calling her, so he checked his phone and there was no record of any new outgoing calls. He told her that he didn't call her, and she said, "That's interesting, because I had a missed call last night from you, and a voicemail." Listen to this. What came next was the weirdest thing ever. It was this loud droning noise with lots of feedback and interference. Her phone would translate any voicemail into text, so while you heard this weird growling sound, the text message read, "Help me. Help me. Are you there? Help me please." Creeped out. Finally, something I can properly reply to, even if it isn't me. So, my ex-girlfriend's mom said she used to live in a haunted house. Ironically enough, it was the house next door to the one they were living in. The story goes that when she was a kid living there they had two separate ghosts, one upstairs, the other downstairs. The downstairs one was more subtle. It would move around petty things, cast shadows along the windows and walls, subtle creepy things that would bother someone. The one upstairs, on the other hand, was apparently trying its darndest to make itself known. Slamming doors, stomping across the floor, walking up and downstairs. The story that made me weary about the house, I'm a firm believer in the paranormal, was when my ex's mom was painting the upstairs hallway wall. The wall was originally red, painted white. Well, they wanted it to be a light blue. So, she started to paint it and she said that while she was painting a certain spot, it started to bleed red through the blue and no matter how many times she painted it, the blue would not stay as the red would bleed through it. I'm not sure the truth about all of this, but walking past that house always had me looking at windows hoping to see a face or shadow in the window. My house isn't haunted, but I had a pretty scary experience once. I was in bed, all doors locked, I always check before going to bed, and was talking to my GF on the phone. All of a sudden, I heard a loud banging on the kitchen door upstairs, and pulling and tucking, as if someone didn't know how to open the door, or as if it were locked. And when I say loud, I mean loud, Fred Flintstone style. I freaked out, my GF even worse, and went upstairs to check it out. Nothing there luckily, but I was properly scared. I remember my dad telling me when I was younger about his house he grew up in when he was a kid. Now, my dad is like the most skeptical man alive, constantly calling bullshit on ghost stories he hears, and even when I bring up the story he told me when I was a kid he kind of brushes it off. Which makes the fact that he has the story in the first place even more pants-destroying terrifying. He lived there with his mom and dad, my grandparents, his two brothers, two sisters, and the family dogs. He would tell me about how when on many occasions he was in the kitchen, the taps would all of a sudden start running when he had his back turned, or that he could hear the noise of a dog lapping up water from its bowl and when he turned around there was no such animal around. Kind of freaky stuff, but nothing that will cause involuntary bowel movements. But then he always used to finish the story by telling me the time he woke up during the middle of the night and saw a shady woman sitting at the end of his bed. It turns out the house used to belong to an elderly couple and their dog. I'm glad I don't go to that house anymore. I don't know where he came from, but I have a friend that has followed me from house to house every time I've moved, for the last 25 years or so. He first appeared at my grandparents' house, where I lived for a good portion of my life. He would then make appearances everywhere I lived, within 6 months of moving there. He first showed up when I was 8 or so. I would see a shadow for a brief moment out of the corner of my eye, but as soon as I turned to look at him, he'd disappear. It made it difficult to get a good look at him, but eventually, I learned to work with my peripheral vision. The man is very thin, and very tall, well over 6 foot in height, wearing all black, and a large dark hat with a wide brim. If I had to place him, I'd say he looks a lot like he belongs in one of the original colonies of Canada, but kind of gothic, as well, because he wears an enormous, billowing black coat. The thing is, he's extremely hard to see, so I only get the outline, and even that is really blurry. It's like looking at smoke. I can't really describe it, but it's more like an impression of someone than the actual fact. Does that make sense? He isn't threatening at all. I've been seeing him forever, so I barely even register his presence now. He's only a shadow, so he has no facial features, and I've never heard him make a sound. After spending 25 years with someone, you kind of get a little comfortable with them, so I've named him Marcus, and I say hello when I see him. He was most active at my last apartment, with 3 or 4 sightings a week, and least active when I lived anywhere for a brief period of time. I move around a lot. I think it takes him time to catch up to me. He just appears, usually in a hallway or doorway, and stands there until I notice him and say, "Hi, Marcus." He usually waits until I look at him, and a split second later, he disappears. He never gets close to me, never says a word to me, never waves or does anything like that. He just stands there, right outside whatever room I'm in, and watches me quietly. And he only does it when I'm alone or the person with me is sleeping. He's never shown himself to anyone else, ever. I don't talk about it often because I'm a total skeptic, honestly, but I don't mind my little friend at all. I might just be used to him, but he doesn't frighten me, and aside from when I was a child, he never really has. I assume I'm A, crazy, or B, sane and beloved by a creepy dead shadow man. My best friend's father went to military school in India. The problem was the infirmary, and one day his friend broke his leg on a training exercise. He ended up in the infirmary, alone. He spent the entire night awake as he lay in his bed listening to a conversation about him from the 2 beds to his left and right. He developed a speech impediment after that, which he still has today. When I was younger, my family moved across the country into a rental home until we got situated and bought our own house. Either way, as soon as we moved in, weird things started happening. My brother and I were fairly young, but we were playing in my parents' room while they were downstairs, and then the door shut out of nowhere and couldn't be opened. There was a basement, and my mom had set all of our toys down, but we were extremely frightened of the basement and would never go down there even if our parents were there. One day, my brother and my dad were gone, and it was just me and my mom in the house. My mom went outside to go shake a rug out, and out of nowhere the front door closed and locked itself. I was fairly young, so I wasn't able to open it, and my mom had to climb through the window to get back in. After we moved out, my mom was talking to some of the neighbors about the house, and it turned out that the people that owned the house had a daughter who used to hold seances in the basement and things of the like, which would explain why we were terrified of the basement. Of course, it could have also been that we were younger and were just afraid of it for no reason. Either way, after we moved out, the people that moved in after us called us afterwards and were asking if anything weird happened when we lived there, because many of the same types of things were happening to them. Another story of mine doesn't involve a haunted house, but rather a cemetery that I believe to be truly haunted. If anyone lives in the Chicago area and really enjoys visiting places that may be haunted, then you have to visit Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. I'm not the biggest believer in ghosts and what have you, but this place was completely different. There was such a weird feeling you get when you enter the cemetery, and many strange things that happen there. Me and a friend heard laughing while inside the cemetery, which is inside a forest preserve, no kids around at all. On a separate occasion, my friend, brother, and I went back there to explore it, and we would take turns standing in various places and such, and we all reported that we heard this weird noise in the same exact spot without either of us talking about it before the other one experienced it. This will likely be buried, but whatever, it's worth it. Also, I'm apologizing in advance for any errors in this post, as it's being posted via mobile, so spelling may be dubious. I did a little bit of work with my local paranormal investigation team. Really is less cool than it sounds, as resident skeptic. I was always an admirer of Randy and was reading and learning a lot about the occult for my history degree, and thought it would be good at least to get first-hand experience of how people can make things up and interpret events differently. So, we would do all-night investigations sometimes and week-long at others that were larger. Most of the places we went to were claiming paranormal activity of really generic nature, voices, visions in the corner of the eye, things being misplaced, that sort of thing, and were almost all easy to explain rationally. One place, however, a local hotel in Wellington, Shropshire, all 6 of us there, 4 believers, 2 skeptics, all saw a man walk across the hallway in front of us and through a door. We all had no idea what we'd seen and followed it up. It was meant to be a 5-hour stay at the hotel and it turned at 35 hours. We experienced south activity in that bulging after that, ranging from voices to people being pushed to my friend getting scratches appear under his clothes. I could give a relatively okay reason for why some of these may have happened and most of the generic activity we saw, but we cannot figure out how 6 of us all saw the same things happen when there was not logical way it could have occurred. When I was 11 I was at home at night. I lived in a small apartment with my sister, my parents, and a dog. I woke up on a school night at about 3 a.m. to loud banging noises on my walls. I'm scared, but after a while I decide they're the pipes or something of the sort. I go to the bathroom, which is in a hallway. My dog follows me. Once I'm done, I wash my hands. Suddenly the water in the tap goes from hot to icy cold and my dog starts growling at the entrance of the open door, and I hear the banging on the walls again, but this time on the walls of the hallways. The water in the tap goes warm again, the noise stopped, and my dog calmed down. Needless to say, I stayed under the covers with my dog and my laptop for the rest of the night. My great-grandmother's house is haunted, and I can't stand sleeping there. Personally, I don't believe in ghosts, but this house is haunted, and I don't care what my brain says. Sleeping on the couch in the living room, I heard the piano playing in the next room. I grabbed a flashlight in the drawer by the couch and walked over to the piano room. When I get close enough to just start seeing the piano, I hear one sharp key hit and then nothing, like I scared it away. Another time, my older brother and I were sleeping in a spare bedroom upstairs. This is my least favorite place on earth. The room is filled with dolls and the 2 twin beds have a small nightstand in the middle with a unicorn rocking lamp, yes, a rocking horse lamp. Just as me and my brother are beginning to fall asleep we hear the horse rocking, and it starts to get kind of fast. My brother reaches over to turn the light on, which is the horse, and swears it swung into his hand as if it had indeed been rocking. I really think my current apartment is haunted. There's been quite a few nights where I wake in a complete fright, and even bolted out of bed. My cats also occasionally look at my ceiling fan that isn't turned on and bolt out of my room. Just the other night, I heard one of the cat toys, that jingle, and I never pick up, hit the floor and jingle, while both cats were in bed with me. One of them was even startled awake at it. I've also felt something lay down on the bed next to me, and thinking it was the cats I would go to pet them, yet nothing was there. I've never lived in a haunted house, but there used to be this old, abandoned plantation house down the street from me. One night me and a friend of mine decided to go in and check it out, because it was creepy, and a pretty big house. We have to go in through one of the windows that leads to the basement. We go upstairs from the basement and hear this strange ticking noise over and over. Tick, 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 tick. We can't really understand what it is, but it's not loud or ominous enough for us really to care. We continue exploring the house and eventually go upstairs. In the upstairs part of this house there is a big center room, almost like a living room on the 2nd floor. We go inside this room, and it is freezing. Mind you, this was in July while staying in Texas. While we're in the room we can still hear the ticking and it's a little louder. It sounds like it's coming from one of the exterior bedrooms, so we are going to investigate. We go inside the room and the only thing in there is a rocking chair. Rocking. By itself. Needless to say, we both practically pooped ourselves and ran to the balcony. We're out on this balcony about 15 to 20 feet up and are trying to talk ourselves into going back in the house so we can leave. Just as we're about to go inside we can hear the ticking getting louder and louder until it starts to sound more like repetitive bangs. Then the bangs start to get closer, and closer until we realize they are footsteps. It sounds like they are big boots jogging down the hall towards us on the balcony. I jumped off the balcony and my friend followed. Luckily neither of us were hurt, but that was easily the scariest moment of my life. I believe that a friend, who passed away a few years ago, is haunting me. He seems to show up most frequently when I'm feeling a little depressed or lonely, which was pretty common of our friendship. He was usually pretty dependable when I needed cheering up. But I usually get this sense of proximity when I'm alone and feeling exceptionally lonely, like he's been watching me, and he knows I need a friend. He's usually pretty passive aside from the feeling of his presence. But occasionally I can hear him laugh along with me while I'm watching movies. The one time that I can recall that he's actually physically messed with me, I had laid down for a nap before heading into work. I gradually started to get the feeling someone was standing over me, like he faded into existence, and he was blocking the ambient light and sound from the TV, and he just stood there for about 10 minutes before reaching down and pushing on the couch cushion where I was resting my head. I shot up in a panic and looked around, but nothing was there. Well, time to tell my story. A few years ago, I was at my dad's house in Lick, New York, and me and my older bro Julian were playing Xbox and the door to the kitchen was open and me and Julian were facing the door. I saw it, a shadow walked into the bathroom from the kitchen. When I saw it I told Julian and he said again. Angel, my oldest bro, also saw a shadow do the same thing. Now a few months ago my dad was home alone sleeping when he smelled gas. He then woke up and went to the kitchen and saw the stove was on. He then turned it off and made sure there was no one home. Then my dad slept on the couch and woke up to the smell of gas again. He then got up and my dog started getting wild, barking at the kitchen. Which he does a lot. I apologize for grammar, I'm on my phone and it autocorrects. When I was a kid, we lived in a rather large house. It had 3 bedrooms on the bottom floor and 3 on the second and 6 more rooms in the attic. Though we didn't know that they were there was a padlock on the attic door when we moved in. The master bedroom, my parents' room, on the second floor would randomly have the doors open. It wasn't just the wind or something either. The doors were that old kind that took a skeleton key. The doorknob would very slowly turn by itself, hesitate as if someone were contemplating whether or not to walk in, and then the door would swing open. The other thing that happened was on the first floor. One of the bedrooms had those kinds of hanging wooden doors that slide. Like some closets have. If those doors were closed and it was storming outside, you could hear glasses breaking and very faint shouting on the other side. We also later found out why the attic was padlocked. Apparently we had moved into an old drug house and there was a raid on the house a few years before we moved in. They tore down every wall in the attic searching for drugs and the landlord couldn't be bothered with renovations, so she closed it off. I don't know if I'd consider this haunted, but after my dad got out of the hospital and was on bed rest he had a dream that SWAT teams were busting through the windows. It caused him to have a heart attack. This was before we knew about the raid. Lots of good stories here. I'm not sure at this point if mine will be seen, but I wanted to share. In college, I worked some ungodly hours in the summer. Basically, from June-September, I was working 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. It was a brutal schedule, but I made really good money. One morning, I woke up at about 4 a.m. like I usually do and headed off for work. I took mostly back roads there, always the same roads. I was driving along a familiar stretch of road that dips a bit as there is a swamp/marsh area. This one particular morning, there was quite a bit of fog hovering over the marsh area, and as the road dipped, I slowed down a bit. I glanced down to check the time, and when I looked back up, there was the faint outline of a little girl dressed in a white dress standing in the middle of the road. I had zero time to react, and I drove right through her. My heart dropped and my car made the most awful noise I've ever heard. The loudest thump it could possibly make. The car jolted upwards as if I were hitting a 3-foot-tall speed bump. I immediately pulled over and got out expecting to see the worst. To my surprise, and mostly confusion, I saw nothing. I spent probably 20 minutes looking at the side of the road, under my car, in the ditch. I even walked a few steps into the marshy area. I found nothing. My car had no dents/marks/blood on it. To this day, I can't really explain what happened. Everything felt so real. I don't tell this story to many friends or family because they only look at me like I'm crazy. The former owner of the condominium I live in was desperate to leave because she claimed to have been constantly haunted by the ghost of a young girl. We moved in, and nothing out of the ordinary happened for 7 years. That being said, I've never really felt secure in my room, as if someone is watching me. Then one day, about a month ago, I was texting a girl I've had a crush on for a while. I finally got the courage to tell her I like her. The moment I pressed send, I felt something cold next to my ear. Then, in the voice of a preteen/early teen girl, ah. Bricks were discharged from my anus. I never lived in a haunted house, but I worked at an old restaurant that was apparently haunted. First I'll give you some background. I lived in a small town, and this restaurant has been there forever, literally the first building built in the town. It started off as a retirement home back in the 60s, then progressed into a lakefront bar and grill. I got a job there as a dishwasher in 2011. Nothing serious ever happened to me during the entire year and a half that I worked there as a dishwasher and cook, but many things happened to the bartenders and servers. I would always have to go down to this creepy basement underneath the place that was used for storage to stock a few freezers and shelves down there, and I would always feel completely fine. But there was an abandoned house that was built onto the restaurant that had the majority of the activity. I remember going in there one night to grab more beer pitchers for the bar, and I remember it was completely freezing cold, even though it was decent weather outside. The whole time being in the house was a feeling of being watched. A server told me one night that a customer reported a hippie-looking girl walking down the bathroom hall. The door to the abandoned house was at the end of the hall and was always locked unless staff was going in, towards the bathroom, but never came out of bathroom. The server told her she simply may have seen a ghost. The restaurant had alarms built onto the doors inside and outside of the kitchen, and numerous times the alarm went off and the owner came to investigate and no door to the outside was unlocked or broken into. Apparently one of the servers was closing the restaurant and she walked into the abandoned house to put some cleaning supplies away and said that she felt a chill as she walked through the doorway. My manager watched the security cameras and said that she saw a ghostly figure of a woman standing in the doorway as the servers walked through. One night after closing the kitchen by myself, I signed out at the bar and said goodnight to the bartenders and was walking around the side of the restaurant. There were no lights around the side, so it was literally completely black, and we had sidestepped that the cooks and servers would sit on and smoke during breaks, and I swear I could see someone sitting on the steps. It was 12 a.m. on a Sunday night and all the other staff were home except the bartenders, who were inside. I quickly got in my car and drove home. I never told anyone about this. A few weeks later, my buddy who also worked in the kitchen with me, was leaving work around the same time, 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. and was going around the side to grab his bike. He said that he saw also a shadow sitting on those steps and thought it was a person waiting to jump him. He hauled out of there and told me the next day. I told him I saw it too a few weeks before but didn't want to sound crazy. I don't work there anymore. This happened to my brother. He's sitting at the kitchen/dining table at his apartment in New York. His back is to the hallway, his then 3-year-old daughter is kneeling on a chair across from him. He catches movement out of the corner of his eye as if someone had just walked into the hallway from the kitchen. Instinctively he turns around and his daughter immediately says, "It's the lady." He turns back to her and asks, "What lady?" She says, "The nice lady." He then asks, "Do you see the lady?" At this point he doesn't want to break the spell of the moment, so he decides to roll with it just to see how far she's going to take it. His daughter says yeah. All along, she keeps playing with her toys on the table. He then asks, "Where is she now?" My niece says, "She's right there," and she's pointing at a spot on the floor right next to my brother by the table. He then asks, "Right here?" She says yeah, she's got a boo-boo, a cut or a scrape. Next he says, "What's she doing?" My niece says, "She's gone." End of the exchange. My brother thinks it's weird, but kids are very imaginative, right? You can figure out where this ends. Lo and behold, the neighbors across the hall tell them months later that the occupant before last was an incredibly old woman who lived alone and died in the apartment. I don't believe in haunted houses, but I do believe in spirits. I believe that a spirit becomes rooted to a location for a specific reason. The fact that a house was built on it serves no greater meaning, but that's a different tale. Here goes. I was probably 9 or 10 years old, living with my parents, my only sister at the time, older, and our then dog, a Cocker Shih Tzu mix named Lucky. It was a lazy summer morning, my parents at work, me and my sister taking care of the chores. I was on laundry duty that day. So, I was hanging the sheets on the wires in our backyard when I suddenly felt very scared. I mean really scared for no reason. I wasn't thinking of anything particularly scary at the moment, so I didn't understand why I felt frightened. I tried to ignore it and kept hanging the clothes to dry, but the fear just kept getting worse. I actually felt ill to my stomach at some point. I considered calling my sister, but she just laughed at me for being a scaredy cat. When it got at its worst, I felt like I wanted to run away and hide somewhere, as if something terrible was hunting me. It took me years to understand that it was an instinctual call that all humans have. When we're faced with danger or extreme fear, our bodies warn us even before our minds have processed what's going on. So, more scared than I've ever been, I continue hanging a large bedsheet and turn around, facing the walkway into the house. I suddenly saw my dog Lucky walking towards me. I couldn't even scream. He was like an ephemeral being, wrapped in darkness. His eyes, completely dark normally, were shining in a bright red, staring straight at me. He was baring his teeth and growling in a way I haven't heard since. He started to run towards me and about 3 feet before me, he vanished into thin air. I fell back, quickly regaining my footing and bolted towards the house. My sister, who should have been in the kitchen making lunch, was nowhere to be found. I couldn't scream out to her, I was mute. I ran to her room and found her hiding under the blanket. I quickly crawled in but retreated almost immediately. Our dog Lucky had been with her the whole time. When we calmed down, she told me that she felt really scared for some reason while washing dishes, then she felt someone touch her lower back. When she turned, all she saw was a huge shadow with no distinct shape looming over her. She couldn't scream, she felt mute, she said. Our dog had been with her and had been whimpering all morning. She grabbed him and hid under the sheets until I showed up. One of the scariest, most inexplicable moments of my life. Many others have transpired after, but the fact that it happened when I was so young definitely influenced me. I know that now that I'm an adult. Our parents never believed us. My sorority house is supposedly haunted. The story goes that she was a pledge of the house that used to be there. At the time, we were renting from them, now we own it, and she was injured during a pledge prank and died in one of the bedrooms. I lived in that bedroom for half of my sophomore year. There were some freaky things that happened, but they could be attributed to faulty wiring. The sorority we rented from wanted us out of the house because they wanted to eventually come back on campus, so they were terrible about maintaining the building and things like that. Several of my sisters claim they saw the ghost, but I never did. I was afraid to go into the attic or basement alone, though. For the entire 3 years I lived in the house. Also, haunted, or not, it's made my chapter famous. I was at headquarters a few years ago, and when they found out what chapter 1 was from, they went, "Isn't that the haunted house?" I grew up in a haunted house. That's even what my childhood friends called it. Really, it's an old Victorian hotel that my parents bought and renovated. There is a lot of history on the plot of land it sits on, in addition to the structure itself. As a child, I would find Native American arrowheads, chunks of pottery from various eras, old sapphire glass medicine bottles, and all sorts of cool things on the property. Regular haunted house occurrences experienced by my family included items going missing. Sometimes things would disappear for weeks, and then you'd find them again in a random and unexpected place. We could have just been a bit scatterbrained as a family, and at one point we did find a squirrel nest in the wall filled with shiny human objects. Smiley face. However, I do remember being in my late teens, when I put a teacup down on the coffee table, turned to attend to something, and when I turned back moments later, my teacup was sitting on a shelf across the room. I just stared at it, dumbfounded. This happened in the middle of the day. Ghost cats. Yes, you heard me correctly. I grew up with lots of cats around. They all, after long happy lives as country/house cats, passed away. I see cats out of the corner of my eye constantly when I visit the house. After we lost a particularly special cat, my mom and I were sitting at the kitchen table. The bowl of dry cat food still sat in the corner, full of food. During a lull in the conversation, we both heard, clearly, the sound of a cat munching on dry food. We looked at each other, then at the bowl of food. No cat. A feeling of love washed over me. That was our kitty letting us know he was okay and still around in some way. When I was exceedingly small, I was terrified to brush my teeth because of the old woman in the closet of the third-floor bathroom. I don't feel her today, but I remember vividly the feeling that I would get when I knew she was watching me. Then there was the shadow man at the top of the steps. I once fell through him, and it was an extremely surprising feeling. Not very scary until I thought about it later. This man did not like one of the boyfriends I brought home in HS. Said BF refused to come up to my room because the man on the stairs does not like me. The man on the stairs was right about that guy. Thanks, ghost friend. I could go on and on. My dad's house has a ghost in it that mainly just stays in the basement. The ghost is a male in his 30s, well at least he was when he died, and hasn't really done anything to me. The problems I had was there would be times when I'm in the kitchen cleaning dishes or making some food and I could feel him on the staircase to the basement. I'd panic and run into my room and feel him behind me but stop at my room. I'm not the only one who can feel him there because my stepmom's sister even said there is one in the basement while she was visiting. I still haven't told anyone about it though. Another time is when my great-grandmother passed away. It was sad, but it didn't really hit me hard because I knew it was her time and she couldn't go on. The thing is that for a while after her death I would feel her around me whether people were home or not. I couldn't ever see her unless I closed my eyes, and it was just her smiling at me. I know she meant no harm, but I just didn't want to handle that situation. Anyway, apart from feeling her near me I would also have very strange dreams about her. One dream was of my brother and my grandmother, her daughter, sitting in my grandmother's living room and I look over at a dark window to see my great-grandmother's face and the walls start covering in blood-red letters making out a note. Another was of us going out to a forest in the middle of nowhere, a beautiful forest that was mystical, and there was this tomb there that was made of marble and was like a fairy tale and we bury her and then as we leave the entire forest was covered in snow. I say snow because I don't know if it was her ashes or if it was actually snow. I did. When I was 4 and my brother was born. We think a ghost followed him home from the hospital or something. It wanted to harm my brother. My room has a built-in wardrobe, albeit a tiny one, and my parents' room has one as well, which are adjacent to each other. Anyway, I had bunk beds in my room, and I slept in the top one, my older brother slept in the bottom one, but he was only here on weekends, and one night I could see a shadowy figure standing at the door of this wardrobe. I was terrified as it stood there for a few hours. Then my parents went to bed, and my new brother slept in between them. I guess they didn't have a crib for him at the time, and then after a half an hour or so it walked through my wardrobe and into my parents' room. This went on for about 4 days. I kept telling my parents, but they said nothing, but they looked at each other with that look. They knew what I was talking about. The same thing happened the next night, but a couple of minutes after it went in I heard my dad shouting, telling it to leave us alone and go away. That was the last I ever saw of it. Turns out this ghost was pushing my parents when they were in bed, trying to roll them on top of my baby brother. But when my dad yelled at the other one, another ghost came in through their door and held the bad ghost by the hand for a while and they just disappeared. They were an old couple. And more recently I believe I spoke to my dead grandfather. He died when I was a few months old. I had never even seen a picture of him before. Then I wake up to see a guy in the chair in my room. Tell me he's my granddad and we will talk for a while. He asked me questions about how everyone's doing and how I'm getting on at school. I asked him if I was even awake. He told me I was. Then he got up, opened my bedroom door, and left. I fell asleep and woke up and my door was still open. I asked my family if anyone had opened my door that night. They said no. I asked if there were any pictures of my other granda. Mum dug them out and sure enough, it was him. I didn't tell my parents about it though. I just kept that little memory for myself, whether it was a dream or not I'm still not sure, but I'll always remember it. So, yes. One good ghost memory and one bad one. Don't believe in this stuff as paranormal phenomenon. I usually like to think that they have perfectly sensible explanations, I just don't know what those explanations are yet. But I have a couple of short stories that I tell when people ask. Cannot explain them. Story 1. Pushed by a phantom. Once when I was young I was riding my bike down my street. No one was with me, and my street was a cul-de-sac, so it usually had just about zero traffic or pedestrians. Perfectly abandoned as far as I could tell. I was riding along leisurely at a rather slow pace when it felt like someone had run up behind me and pushed on my back, speed boost. I immediately turned my head laughing, assuming it was my neighbor who must have been hiding in the bushes, saw me ride by, and decided to surprise me. I was impressed that he had been able to run so quietly, as I did not hear him approach. No one was there, and as quickly as I had turned my head, no one could have escaped that quickly. My wide smile quickly died, and my eyes went large. I was really creeped out, so I immediately rode home and sat and thought for a while. Story 2 Shadow Trespasser. Another day when I was young, I was sitting in our living room in the middle of the day when I saw a dark man-shaped figure walk by our window. This rustled my sprinkles a bit because this was the window on the side of our backyard, where strangers obviously should not be walking around. I knew none of my family members were back there, so I immediately went and got my dad, telling him someone was wandering around our backyard and that he needed to go handle the situation. No one was there. My dad asked me what he looked like, and I couldn't say, as he was too dark, like in shadow. However, I realized later on that in the spot right outside the window, a figure should have been in full sun. It was like a shadow just walking by. Story 3 My own private earthquake. I was sitting in my room playing video games with my sister when there was an earthquake. Not a little one, either. Lasted at least 5 seconds and shook a bunch of my old toys off the shelves. However, as I live in California, I was not afraid. I just thought it was fun and walked to the kitchen to talk about it with my mother. She had no idea what I was talking about, but she immediately noted that just before I came in, the closet door right outside my room had just opened by itself. I went outside to ask my dad, who was working in the backyard, and he similarly had no idea what I was talking about. Asked my neighbors the next day, still nothing. I had a 5-second long earthquake localized entirely within my room. I guess it also shook open the closet door right outside my room. My sister was there with me for this one, so she can back up the story. Story 4 Phantom Voice. I usually went to bed late when I was younger, so my parents had already been asleep. I decided it was time to hit the hay, so I shut off my light and walked over to my bed. Just as I laid down, I heard a man's voice call my name. I figured my dad was actually awake and had called me when he noticed my light turned off. I walked into the doorway of my parents' room, and they were both obviously very asleep. Didn't know what to make of it, but I was really creeped out. I had trouble sleeping when I went back to bed. I'll make this short. 6 years old, wake up to see an older kind of ugly woman leaning against my dresser smoking a cigarette. It was dark, and even though my mom hasn't smoked a day in her life, I called out, "Mom?" No response, she just kept smoking. I could see the red glow of the tip and the smoke swirling around. She said nothing. Just watched me sleep. She wasn't that scary. I just went back to sleep and assumed it was my mother. The next day I asked my mom why she was smoking in my room. She obviously was very confused. The second incident, age 6, my sister and I were sleeping in our basement because it was hot. I woke up randomly terrified and had the strongest urge to go upstairs and get out of the basement as fast as I could. I ran upstairs with my sister to find one of our fans had caught on fire and flames were up to the ceiling. I didn't smell smoke or hear the fire when I was sleeping. I knew something woke me up on purpose. My whole house would have burnt down if I didn't wake up. Third incident, age 6, I was sleeping in my sister's bed facing out into the hallway. A little red glowing dot appeared in the darkness out in the hallway, then smoke started swirling around. The red glow moved all around like it was dancing. I'm assuming it was the smoking lady who didn't show herself but only her cigarette and wanted to play with me. I found it amusing. I wasn't scared. I just went back to sleep. That's all I really remember happening. I was not a very imaginative child. I didn't have imaginary friends or was very silly. I was bored. I remember to this day at 25 what I saw. We moved out of that house when I was 10. My dad tells this story whenever something paranormal comes up in conversation. About 25 years ago he used to work the late shift at work, so he and his coworker would often go for a drink before they started work, just a beer, no big deal. Well, around 11 to 12, they had to drive through the country to get there. My dad was driving in front and his friend in back. They went down a hill, over a short bridge, and were about to go back up another hill when they saw two people on the side of the road. A young woman and a little boy, probably 6 to 10 in terms of age. She was standing behind him and had her arms over his shoulders and clasped in front of his chest. My dad thought that it was weird. Well, when they get to work, the friend asks if my dad also saw the woman and the boy. Now that they knew for sure they had seen something, they called the police. The police combed every road and asked all the close-by farmhouses if they'd seen anyone or heard from anyone. No one had. They never found a single person. My dad did some digging and found out that there used to be a house out there, but it had burned down about 100 years ago. The family that lived there died in the fire. My dad never used to believe in ghosts. Now he does. Oh, I got two that happened in the same house. When I was 4 to 12, I was born in 1985, we used to live in this really old house. It was built about 1910 to 1920. This was your standard creepy old farmhouse. Well, the first instance happened in the winter after we had lived there a few years. My mom and dad would move the mattress from their room into the living room so that they could get the heat from the wood fireplace. Well, my parents were lying on their bed watching TV, when they saw a black shadow run past from their room towards my siblings and my room. They didn't hear it run past, they just saw this dark form run past them. My dad gets up grumbling kids are supposed to be in bed, as this was about 11 p.m. So, he went into our room and we're all dead asleep. He knows we are because 5-, 3-, and 2-year-old can actually fake sleep. The second incident happened the next summer. The farm we lived on was an old tobacco farm. Well, the old drying pit was still there, and my dad was cleaning it out so that no snakes would get into it. After he got down into the pit, the lid slammed shut on him. A tobacco pit is about 4 to 5 wide square. As soon as this shuts, he tries to open it back up to get out. But something is on the other side of it holding the door down. My dad is by no stretch of the imagination weak. He once held up a four-wheeler one-handed while he and my brother were riding so it would not crush him. It dislocated his shoulder doing it. But after the hatch finally opened and he got out, he never went near it as long as we lived there. My great-grandfather died a rebel in the Mexican Revolution. My grandma claims his spirit has taken care of our family ever since, and I believe her. When I was little, I was woken by my crying sister, but my parents weren't. However, she stopped crying really quickly. When I went to see her, her crib was rocking silently, and some, nearly invisible, mist was fading away beside it. I was almost frozen in fear, so I just laid back down in bed, and tried to sleep. I felt a little cold on my cheek, as my blanket was pulled up to my shoulders. When I opened my eyes, the same mist was fading away in front of me, but I felt calm and sleepy, and slept soundly through the night. Another time, about 2 years later, we moved, and this house, it was haunted. At first it was small, almost unnoticeable stuff, pictures switched places, phones rang, but there was nothing. Then weirder stuff started happening. My mom loved to have a well-decorated house, so my bed had a lot of decorative pillows, specifically 3 were used. Each pillow had 2 colors, splitting in the middle, 2 of them, black and light brown, and the one between them orange and brown. Now I always arranged it in the same pattern, black facing outwards, orange-brown in the middle, brown facing left. I was playing, when I heard some shuffling. I turned to look, and the pillows had changed. Black was inwards and the orange-brown had the brown to the right. I really got creeped out, as I had done the bed about 10 minutes ago, and I had placed it in the usual pattern, but I decided to try and forget it. A month later, I'm sitting, watching TV, with a food tray with my food placed on a stool beside me. I was sitting there relaxed, when the stool makes a loud screeching noise. I turned to look at it. It is falling, and I hadn't touched it. I closed my eyes instinctively, when I heard the wood hit the floor with a loud bang. I heard a laugh in a whispering tone, an evil one. When I opened my eyes, the stool was upright, nothing spilled, as if nothing happened. I ate the little food I had left quickly, turned off the TV, and ran to tell my mother. She had heard the bang too, but didn't believe me when I told her what happened. I couldn't sleep that night, and that very same night, it happened. I was frozen in fear, trying to sleep, when I heard a voice in a hushed angry tone, say that's it. I clutched my blankets in it, when I heard a man beg, no, wait, no. And I heard a gunshot, and it was the sound of an old musket. Then a final whisper came to my ear. Sleep well. After that night, nothing else happened, and I strongly believe my grandpa got rid of the evil spirit. I now pray for my grandpa every night. Our great-grandpa died. Spirit takes care of family, eliminates an evil spirit haunting my house. I moved into a house a few years back. Things would happen periodically, and it eventually led to me not being able to enter the house unless someone else was there. I would grab the phone and wait on the curb outside until my sister got home. Anyways, one time I was in my room with a couple of friends, and there was a knock at my door. I thought it was my sister, but turns out she was sleeping downstairs. So, the knocks got closer to us. They started on the walls, and then progressed to the floor right next to my feet. Another time, I was sleeping on the couch, and I woke up to a woman in a Renaissance-style yellow poofy dress, sitting on a chair, looking at me, and just sipping some tea. Thinking I was half asleep, I did the cliché rub your eyes to make sure you're awake thing, and she was still there. Just staring at me. Calm as could be. Needless to say, I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Yes. Lived in a house where many people including me, would see or hear certain things. My aunt saw a woman walk down the wall, my sister and cousin saw a man walk down the hall, two of my aunts said someone tried to get in the house, because you could hear the doorknob. I saw a baby crawl behind and once I completely turned around it was gone. Also at night, the doors would get slammed as if someone were trying to break in. I felt breathing on me once and inside the house you always felt like you were being watched. Scary and don't live there anymore. My grandmother's old house was supposedly haunted, and we lived there for a few years after she passed away. The basement was your typical creepy basement, none of us really liked to go down there because it was always freezing and dark. One basement room, just full of bookshelves, and a twin guest bed, had a door that we never closed all the way because it would get jammed and was really hard to open, especially for an older lady, I guess. Anyway, she went to the island for a week and asked a neighbor to feed her cat, let it out in the morning and let it back in the evening. On the third or fourth day, the neighbor went to go let the cat out in the morning, but she couldn't find it anywhere on the main floor. She went to the basement and looked around, got to the spare room and the door was shut tight. After she managed to wrench the door open, my grandma's cat bolted out of the room totally freaked out. Another event happened in the same room, when my dad and one of his brothers were still living at home. The spare room with the funky door was my Uncle Mark's room and one day he came home from school and all of his books were strewn about everywhere. He blamed it on my dad, but my dad had been at school all day with my uncle. In my previous apartment, I'm fairly sure there was a ghost, at least one that came around occasionally. Maybe a month after we moved in I was sitting in the living room reading when I heard a timer ticking. When I went to check it out, the toaster oven was on and was hot. The strange thing is that I was home alone, and it wasn't me who turned it on. Plus, it has a dial you must turn for it to start, so it's not like a button you could accidentally press. We lived there for 2.5 years and there were about 4 periods where activity would pick up for a time and then stop again. My cat would get crazy, and he's a pretty chill cat. Things would go missing for days and then turn up in random places like the floor of the bathtub, the middle of the counter. Eventually when things went missing, I'd say aloud, "Come on, give it back," and within a day or so whatever it was would turn up somewhere random but completely visible where it would easily be found. Things would move a lot. Magnets moved on the fridge overnight, things would sway like there was a draft where there was none. It was odd, but never very scary or threatening. We moved when the building burnt down. Our suite was not burned, but we still had to move out. It was an electrical fire. Sometimes I wonder if our ghost friend just wanted the building for herself. I lived in a couple actually. Ever since I was a kid I'd been exposed to the other side. I remember visiting my grandmother's colonial-era home and getting told that I was imagining things all while there were people dressed in colonial-era clothing wandering around behind my family. Grandmother's house, mother's side. I used to live in said house. Obviously it's old and creaky, so it's going to make noise, but some noises, you can't blame on the house settling. At night, you can hear doors slam upstairs and people walking around, but here's the thing. You cannot slam a single door upstairs. The carpet is too thick, and you have to pull pretty hard to get the door to close in general. Plus, the way the door frames are, they're not as straight as they used to be, so you have to do some maneuvering to get the door to actually shut. One night, I had gone to bed and was lying there. My room was right next to the attic, and you could clearly see the attic door from my bed. My grandmother had gone to bed as well. While lying in bed, I watched the attic door swing open and a couple dressed in colonial-era clothing stepped out. I gasped and the couple both snapped their heads in my direction. I will never forget the looks on their faces. They were so angry and hostile. I screamed and blacked out. My grandmother never heard me scream despite being in the next room over. The apartment then there was the apartment I used to live in with my mother when I was 14. Once, I was in the bathroom putting my hair into a ponytail and my friend stood in the doorway watching me. He turned at the right moment to see a dark figure run past him into my room. I saw it too, but his reaction was hilarious. I guess you could see he looked like he just saw a ghost. He didn't want to hang out in my room after that. This is the same apparition we saw most often. It liked running from the living room into my room and it was pretty skittish. I remember once seeing it in an orb form behind me. I had music going and I was dancing to the music while on my computer. I felt something behind me, and there it was. It also seemed like it was dancing and bouncing around to the music as well. It noticed that I noticed a few seconds later, froze, and then vanished. Also in this apartment, I remember there was an entity that neither of us liked. It was extremely negative and whenever it was around, the air felt thick and heavy. One night, I had just gone to bed, and I hadn't fallen asleep yet, but that heavy thickness was in the air. I realized I couldn't move, I felt weight on my chest, and it was like something was holding down my limbs. It was like your typical sleep paralysis, but I don't think it actually was. I called out to my mother, and she came running in. When she flicked on the light, I could move again and there was no more weight on my chest, but that heaviness in the air still lingered. Even she felt it. The next day, I cast out the entity with sage. Later on, that night, I heard knocking on my window. We lived on the second floor with no access to my window from the ground. The new house. Then we moved into another house across town. This house had only one previous owner, well two, but they were a married couple. The husband, Mr. Jacques, died in 2000 of a heart attack, and we bought the house from his wife. I was the last to move in and as soon as I stepped inside, I automatically knew that we weren't the only ones living there. My mother tried telling me that I was being silly, but I knew better. Turns out the previous owner never really left his house. He's shown himself in a full apparition to only me, but as a moving shadow on the wall to my mother and her friend. He likes to slam doors and knock things over and be a mischievous pain in the rear. There was one night he wouldn't allow me to sleep. He kept blowing in my ear, and when I would turn around, there he was, smiling at me in a full-body apparition. As soon as I turned back around, he would blow in my ear again. He was never a threat or hostile to us, he was just playful. In the basement, Mr. J has a workshop where he works with wood and builds things, well he used to build things. One Christmas Eve, my mother and I both heard footsteps going up and down the basement stairs and someone building something downstairs. We figured since he built many things in the house, he was probably reliving a memory or making a Christmas present for his wife. We have a joke that my cat likes being in the basement because Mr. J gives him lots of attention. Grandmother's house, dad's side. I moved in with my grandmother on my father's side as well. Her house has also always seen activity, but she's just now noticing it and claims that I brought it in with me. I've only gotten her to see it finally. Before I had my own room, I used to sleep on the couch. Above the couch, there are pictures of the family on the wall, one of which is my great-grandmother, which was pretty much glued onto the wall with adhesive pads. It didn't budge if you tried to take it off yourself. Before she died, whenever that picture of her felt bizarre, the next day, the nursing home would call and tell us she fell. One night, I laid there staring at all the pictures on the wall and noticed the picture of her was slowly peeling itself bizarrely. I said, "Hey!" sternly, and the picture froze for a second, then snapped itself back onto the wall. They also say that when you see the ghost of a loved one on someone's bed, the owner of that bed is the next to die. I ended up seeing the ghost of my great-grandfather sitting on my grandfather's bed. It shocked me a little, but I didn't think anything of it. After moving out, I learned of this ghost on a loved one's bed thing and told my mother and her friend what I saw. My mother's eyes went wide, and she informed me that a month after the incident, my grandfather, a diabetic, nearly went into a coma when his sugar dropped too low one night. If the dog hadn't started barking at his door, he would have died during the night, and no one would have known something was wrong until it was too late. I guess I unknowingly predicted something bad was going to happen. I moved back in and started noticing more. I'd be just waking up, and it would sound like there are about 20 people in my room, all talking all at once. One time, I heard them talking about my cousin, and as soon as they noticed that I was awake, this male voice shushed them all pretty loudly, and all at once, it was quiet again. My grandmother woke up to the same exact thing one morning. When her alarm goes off, it's usually on talk radio in the morning. This particular morning, she woke up to a group of voices talking to each other all at once. She thought it was her alarm going off, so she reached over to turn it off only to find that it was 4 a.m., but the voices were still speaking. They went on for a minute before they realized she was awake and stopped. As she was falling back asleep, she heard them start talking to each other again. My cousin used to have a room down in the basement, and she could also tell you that she wasn't the only one down there. Before she had a doorknob on her door, she saw shadows of people walking by through the hole. She would also see things being lifted and carried across her room and the basement most nights. A few of my friends and I stayed down there for a few hours in the dark, hoping to see these shadows. We weren't disappointed either. We saw quite a few that night, and we weren't near the electrical box either. The voices aren't the only thing my grandmother has encountered in her room at night. She sees a shadow in the corner of her room, which I have caught on camera and have seen for myself. She also sees this orb that lights up her entire room occasionally. Footsteps can be heard walking down the hallway and shadows are seen constantly at my grandmother's house. Even my aunt saw things as a young girl living in that house. She still sees them now, and my grandmother is just now believing her. I have plenty more stories, but I feel like this is just going to get buried because it's so long. My parents were convinced my childhood home was haunted. I must have been 3 or 4 at the time of this story. My parents and I were living in an old house next to a cemetery where each floor was turned into an apartment, and my grandmother lived downstairs. There were rumors that an older woman and a little boy had died in the house, but no one had ever seen anything. Then one night my mom heard me talking in my room when she went past to go to her room. When she peeked in to see what's up, I was apparently asleep and talking to myself, but she asked if anything was wrong to see if I was up. This is when things got weird. My mom says I shot up in bed, stared at her, and started laughing hysterically. She was so confused and thought I was joking. She told me to go back to bed, and I started hysterically sobbing and crying. When she sat on the bed to see what I was up to and started laughing again, then crying, and then laughing and so on. My mom was so scared she went downstairs to get my grandma, who didn't believe her at first. After a few minutes I calmed down and I don't remember anything about this. My mom tells it because she is completely convinced that I spoke to the ghosts and was haunted by them. I don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal or even conspiracies, who can keep a secret longer than 24 hours, but I lived in such a place. I had an out-of-body experience. I saw myself from above. I awoke to the strangest sensation of someone being in the room with me. That feeling of eyes on you. I had that. My sister lives there now and her cat has flipped out on occasion in that room. Also, I opened the curtains to find a ginger cat just staring in. I have photos of the cat, so that was the real thing. The other can be attributed to odd things, but they sure were creepy. I once lived in this incredibly old house. It even had a foundation of stacked rocks, not exactly sturdy. There were rats on the roof and raccoons under the house, but that wasn't what made the place seem haunted. Usually I felt pretty secure, but one time I was ill with the flu and my mother left me alone in the house while she ran errands. Both the dog and the cat stayed by my side the entire day. I was looking out the window when I saw in full daylight a figure run across the lawn. I thought at first it was some person running around out there, but it wasn't right. Both animals looked startled. The figure was black, with fuzzy edges like a shadow, no features or clothes. I staggered outside with my samurai sword in hand, planning on confronting a trespasser, adrenaline pumping. But I could find no one. No one could have run away out of sight that fast without making any noise. Maybe it was a hallucination from the fever, but I still feel it was a ghost. Not a house, but at my local movie theater. I'm friends with everyone that works there. Our movie theater is really small, only 2 cinemas. Previous employees have some stories and claim the place is haunted. Well, one night me and my friend let's call it decided to stay the night there with 2 other people B and C. We proceeded to sit in the largest cinema and get really stoned. Me and A then spent about 20 minutes trying to convince B that the place was haunted. C passed out in one of the chairs. Well, after trying to convince B that the place was haunted, we decided to smoke another bowl. Afterwards we sat in the front row and just talked. Well, each cinema has a private room next to the projection room. I heard tapping on the window from the private room and just shrugged it off at first, but I kept hearing it. My stone mind kept saying no, you're not hearing anything, but it kept coming back. I then looked at A and said, are you hearing this too? He said yep. Then we went up to the projection room, laid down the extra movie posters and used them as pallet to sleep on. I don't believe that my house was haunted, but I do believe that spirits lingered around a bit. My mom's brother died when he was 4 from open heart surgery in the 1960s, and my aunt's twin died when he was young in the late 1950s. In my house, I lived with my aunt, my uncle and his wife, my sister, my grandpa, and my grandma until she passed away last month. Out of all the years I've been here, there's always been something weird going on. There were petty things like shadows or the feeling that someone was standing behind me. There were also a few instances where the blanket would be pulled off or I would be unable to pull it off of me when I woke up in the middle of the night. The weirdest ones were always ones with little kids. A few years ago, I walked into my grandparents' room. My grandpa always sleeps on the left and my grandma, who was in the hospital at the time, slept on the right. My grandpa was taking a nap and I needed to get the remote for the TV, and there was a young boy sitting on the edge of the bed in this blue pinstripe outfit. As soon as I saw him, he vanished, but there was a cold spot around the area where he was sitting. I'm sure it was one of my grandma's 2 sons that has died. My grandma's walker would also be pushed around from spot to spot at times. My lights would flicker on and off randomly throughout the years. My headphones would start playing weird noises. I remember very vividly hearing a child giggling when I was preparing my grandma's insulin needle during dinner once. When my grandma died, my family heard ringing throughout the house. It couldn't have been the TV since my grandpa kept it off for the duration of days that her wake and funeral took place out of respect for her. It was a sort of old rotary phone ringing. I heard it all of the time and nobody else would hear a thing. My mom and aunt heard it once too. Scents are quite common throughout my house. I've woken up countless times to the smell of perfume that my grandma or late aunt used to wear. It's all harmless things, but there's always been weird happenings around my house. My friend may have read this story already, but essentially, he was trying to convince me that his house was haunted. As in, he felt bad vibes and crazy juju emanating from a door that led under the house. He said he would hear the door slam. His mother even kept a Bible next to her bed and she'd never been to church, so juju was obviously going down. I was over at his house, and we weren't even talking about it, but he shushed me hastily mid-sentence to the sound of creaking, then a slam. You could access the door from the outside, under the back deck. The house was on an incline. We went to investigate. I'm sure by now a dot or 2 of urine had appeared upon my undergarments, as we were standing, staring at the door, which was open, and shouldn't have been. We heard it slam. Then the single most horrifying thing I've ever been privy to, we watched as the door swung shut and bolted itself locked. We absolutely bolted back upstairs and ate a big old bowl of creepy pasta. I have since convinced myself it was the wind. He never got a video of it, and they moved away within a few months. Just the wind. My cousin lived in a flat with some flatmates which they were all sure was haunted. It started small with feelings like they were being watched, cold chills on sizzling summer days, and things like that. After a while things got more interesting. Pots and pans would crash together in the night, while she was the only one home, or everyone was asleep. Things would move, sometimes disappear. Finally, one night she rolled over in bed to see a lady in a dress from an earlier era leaning over her bed. They called someone over who determined it was a spirit of someone who had been killed during the First World War there. My mom told me that when I was 3, I climbed up our couch, unlatched the deadbolt and opened our front door on Halloween night. I was told that when she found me I was bawling my eyes out on our sofa, and when asked why, I told her that I had seen the devil outside. She said I explained it to her as some large dark/shadowy apparition floating in the middle of our street. Needless to say, she freaked the hell out. I worked in an old mansion. I was donated to the university I attended by a wealth widow following her husband's death. It was a beautiful Scottish Tudor revival house built in the 1920s. The house was just a few blocks off campus and housed a couple of smaller academic departments. I loved working in the lovely old building, especially being able to watch the sunrise over Lake Michigan from my desk in the winter. The staff from the previous department that was housed there told us that the place was creepy. I like to think of myself as more rational than the type that believes in ghosts. I had been there about a year when it was time to move the department to our new building. One professor, as they sometimes do, decided that he was too important to pack up his own office, and despite the fact that I already worked overtime, I got stuck boxing up his things. It was a muggy evening during a summer heat wave. The air in his office was hot and still. As I stood in front of his desk packing some framed photos, his swiveling desk chair beside me started to spin off of its own accord. No fan blowing, no open windows. I watched in disbelief for a few rotations before reaching over and stopping it. I began thinking about rational explanations as I went back to packing. A sudden noise made me jump. 8 tall, thin boxes containing framed artwork that had been propped up against the wall all started sliding. I ran over and caught them. I didn't want to be responsible for breaking the professor's art. Again, I went back to work, thinking about a reasonable way to understand the happenings. The next morning, I told the assistant dean what had happened. She seemed scared but invigorated by the story. She told me that that room had belonged to the head of the household, Mr. Michaels, and that he had died in the house, most likely in that room. When I spoke with a staff member from the department that previously occupied the space, she told me that other people that experienced similar things there. I understand why ghost stories persist. Each time I shared the story with a coworker there, the reaction was a mix of chills and exhilaration. I, peripheral and short-lived as a staff member there, had something exciting to say. People gathered around me to hear the story. I was temporarily intrigued. I have told the story many times, but I still can't reconcile the existence of ghosts with my own beliefs. I reach for the unlikely, but rational explanation, although it seems as likely as ghosts. Live in a new house, built in '99, but we were the first to live here. Used to be farmland. No ghosts per se, but I did get visited by my dead grandfather. Mid-afternoon in the summer, on a Sunday. I was nursing a decent hangover, but nothing epic. Lying on the couch in the living room, not asleep, but resting. It was like he came to my soul, and he could see my thoughts. He basically told me, without words, that he liked my life at that point, and that I was doing okay. Not particularly exciting really, but it did make me feel good. I never really knew him when he was alive. We lived in California, and he was in Texas. He died in 1989, when I was in college, so I didn't even get to go to his funeral. I really believe that certain people are more sensitive to the supernatural than others, and fortunately, I'm one of those people. I have had quite a few run-ins with wherever I have lived. My roommate is from New Orleans, and when we went to visit last time, we visited his aunt, a medium, who told us we picked up a little visitor, a boy, around 8, who tends to follow us around. Normally, I think she's bullshitting us, but I'm not so sure anymore. There have been multiple occasions here where we've come home to have all of our cabinet doors opened, and all of our doors in the apartment open as well. We've also come home to have all of the doors shut with the blinds drawn. There have also been times where I've been in bed and our faucet will randomly turn on, or our toilet will flush. It doesn't bother us especially since nothing has happened to harm us. But it's still creepy. So, I'm on a trip to Telluride, Colorado skiing with my 2 roommates from college. One roommate's family owns a condominium in the town. The night we get there, we unload the car. We spent the night smoking and drinking, and I eventually passed out on the couch in the living room. The sleeping arrangements are me and one friend in one bedroom and another friend in the other bedroom. I wake up at around 6:30 a.m. and decide to get off the couch and go to bed. On the wall in the living room are 2 similar-looking watercolor paintings hanging side by side. Anyways, when I woke up at 6:30, I distinctly remember the two pictures hanging on the wall. I head to bed and sleep until about 9 a.m. One of my friends was already awake when I crawled out of bed. I walk back into the living room and the two pictures are neatly set on the ground. My friend claims he never touched them. My other friend was asleep the entire time. How did those pictures get bizarre onto the ground? This was just yesterday, and there has been some other weird thing that just seems off in this condominium. Any suggestions? One incident stuck in my mind. I've always been a night owl, and when I was in high school, I would stay up late and sometimes my dad would knock on my bedroom door and tell me to go to bed. One night I was up late reading with a dim light turned on. Right outside my door I hear someone say my name clearly and rather loudly. It was a low man's voice. Naturally, I think it's my dad trying to get me to go to bed, so, being the teenager I am, I reply with a sarcastic what? Nothing. No response. Again, I reply, what, a little louder. Still nothing. At this point, I'm annoyed, so I fling open the door, expecting to see my dad, and nothing's there. There are no lights turned on in the house. I heard no footsteps walking away from my door. Just an eerie cold dark silence. I am starting to get nervous. To verify what just happened, I get up and very quietly walk to my parents' bedroom door to hear if they're awake, but I instead hear them snoring like they've been sleeping for hours. My brother is in bed passed out, too. I went back to my room and locked it. I grew up with frequent, aggressive night terrors till the age of 15. When my mom was in her 20s, she would occasionally have exactly accurate premonitions of accidents that happened to her close friends, too. Down to the detail. Not sure if any of these are in any way connected. When I was younger I lived in a single-story house that had one long hallway through the middle. One night when I went to bed, I was lying there and a figure walked past. I called out to it, "Dad. Dad." But it continued to walk. I thought nothing of it, perhaps my voice wasn't loud enough, until my dad walked past my door a few minutes later in the same direction as the figure before. I believe this now to be the ghost of my grandfather. It was around the time he had passed away. Strangely enough, at his funeral, as I was crying in the pews, someone tapped me on the shoulder. I immediately stopped crying and turned around to face whoever tapped me. Now this wasn't like a small nudge like someone brushing you while they walked by. This was full force tap, like, "Excuse me, turn around," and when I turned around all I saw was an old man who looked at me and smiled. I turned to ask my dad if he just saw that man tap my shoulder. Apparently he didn't. When I was ages 1 to 4, I lived in a house out in the country with only one neighbor. There was an overwhelming sense of an angry spirit in that house. My family and I were watching TV one time and I had this overwhelming feeling to go pull my sister's hair. I didn't want to do it, but I felt as though I was being made to do it. I did it and ran under my bed. He revealed himself to me in the bathroom mirror and told me to kill my sisters. We moved shortly after that, and I didn't kill anyone. When I was just a baby, my sister tried to kill me twice claiming someone told her to do it. I wish I were lying. It still scares me. The house I grew up in had 2 barns, one of which was particularly creepy looking on the inside. It also happened that one of the former owners was kicked by a horse and died in that barn. My sister had a couple friends who would come over regularly, and one day my mom told them all about it. Soon, curiosity gets the best of them, and her friends want to go exploring the barn, since it might be haunted. My sister then took the opportunity to have me hide in a corner of the barn. When they all walked by, I jumped out and scared all my sister's friends. So, though we never saw any ghosts, some people refused to enter our old haunted barn. Well, I lived in a pretty nice house just outside of Dallas. Beautiful place. Looked just like a stereotypical ranch house. Giant yard, 2-story, with a giant basement with it all. Anyway, the wife and I lived there for a couple of years, before we started hearing these weird sounds come from the basement. Like a swooshing noise and running water. I had the courage late one night to go find out what it was. I went down, slowly moving down the stairs with flashlight in hand. I point to the walls, seeing nothing. I move on through the room, and all of a sudden, I see these big red eyes, and I say to the monster, "What do you want, monster?" And the monster says, "I need a tree fatty." I scream at the monster, "God damn it Nessie, I ain't giving you not tree fitty." My old house was haunted. There was a substantial number of small stuffs, but this takes the cake. I was spending a weekend without my parents. Naturally, I'd be with my girlfriend, getting freaky, but for reasons I'm not going to go in, I had to spend half of that time alone. So, there I was Saturday night, all alone and bored as all hell. I don't really know what possessed me, but I did the one thing you do not do when all alone. I spent the entire freaking night watching all of the Grudge movies, Japanese and American versions, and finished it with Shudder, Thai version. Needless to say, I was an idiot because I simply couldn't go to sleep that night. My hands were shivering, I was jumping at every little sound and just couldn't convince myself to calm down. I was much better the next day because I did get to spend some time with my girlfriend, but I was still unnaturally jumpy after the whole ordeal I put myself in the night before. At least I managed to actually go to sleep with her around. Now for the weird part, at one time she woke up to go to the bathroom and woke me up while getting out of bed. I spent the time waiting for her by thinking about how creeped out I was last night, how my creaky floorboards were scaring me, how I kept seeing petty things that made me jump, and how I couldn't shake the feeling of being in danger. Needless to say, I was slowly beginning to get nervous again, and then something super strange happened. I felt a presence. I've always heard this expression on TV or in scary stories and was actually surprised to find it was a real thing. You see, for a second I could have sworn that there was someone behind my bed, next to the window. In that exact moment, the closed curtains quickly opened all by themselves with a loud noise, and I intuitively knew two things. One, ghosts and paranormal things were real, and I finally had some proof. Two, I was completely and totally scared. So, I instantly went full fight or flight mode. I literally screamed on the top of my lungs. I darted out of bed in the other corner of the room in less than a second, hit my back at the closet with a loud thud, and tried to see what was the thing at the window that was pulling my curtains, and realized a third thing, that the creepy horrible Japanese chick with long black hair from the movies that scared me the last night was real, standing at my window, looking at me while my girlfriend was in the bathroom and was going to murder me in a most horrible and gruesome way. I totally lost it, started growling like a mad thing, saliva was actually dripping from my mouth. I went full berserk in my panic and lifted a chair in the air, about to throw it at the apparition. And then I realized that the apparition was talking to me, really politely and quietly, asking me by my name to please calm down and telling me that it's just me. It was my girlfriend. It turned out I had very quickly fallen asleep after she went to the bathroom and missed her coming back to my room. She just wanted to open the window, and in my sleepy state I saw her as similar to Kayako from the movies. I managed to laugh it off, though she was shaking and had to spend the night with the light on. I had scared her half to death, laughing face. The really funny thing is that she actually didn't leave me then or the next time I pulled something like this, when she surprised me on the top of a dark stairway late at night and I almost punched her in the face. I thought Reddit was supposed to be full of atheists. My door opens and slams shut all the time, gives me a jolt, but nothing more than that. I sometimes see things out of the corner of my eye that are really nothing but the mind. The only voice I hear alone comes from my own mind. The cat scares me sometimes by doing something unexpected when I don't have a door closed that I thought I had. Did you hear that? Plays in a psychological mechanism of conforming to others. It is all mind games, and that is all they are, games. I have read a great deal of religious texts cover to cover, and my mind can conjure up plenty of ways to psych me out. Especially when you start thinking about the mark of the beast and finding 3 lines on your back. The most convincing video I have ever seen was filmed back in the 60s or something, and that seemed to be a case of self-inflicted injury where it was claimed a demonic spirit tried to choke him. He had a convincing welt around his neck, but there are people today that like to get choked for the arousal of it all. To all these stories, I have to admit it is probably just in your head. I will not say for sure, because even in science we never say something that is 100% for sure. There is always the slight probability that our null hypothesis can be proven false. I will be the first to say that my hypothesis about it all being in your minds, all other things being held constant, can be proven false, and that it is due to some type of other than normal activity. Does that mean that I would jump to paranormal? No. First I would have to define paranormal and restate my hypothesis regarding the specific parameters of paranormal and normal activity being the same or statistically not the same, while eliminating confounds. If I could come up with a controlled study, I would run it and get published. Maybe I should open the Ouija board studies that were once conducted on the campus in the 60s just for the heck of it and incorporate the most recent technology we have for measuring electromagnetic, emotional, kinesthetic, act responses people have to the game. Or I could just tell a ghost story about an experience I had that my brain tried to tie together as paranormal, but only because I was going through a period of terrible grief. My mind made up a much nicer story than the actual fact of the matter. On the other hand, it probably also could have gone the other way and made it scarier or whatever. I used to stay at a friend's house a few years ago. He used to complain his house scared him. He lived on a farm in the middle of nowhere. My mom's side of the family used to live on a farm nearby that was haunted, so it wasn't anything new to me when he told me about being scared there. I have always believed in ghosts, but have only ever been scared by them a few times. His house felt strange, his family lived on the top floor, his grandparents lived on the bottom. I always felt strange going into the house, but it wasn't scary, and I always just thought it was from all the dust, because it was an old farmhouse. I was at his house one night, we were fighting over his computer as it just had dial up and we both wanted to use it. Nothing new, we both looked up suddenly and jumped out of our skins. The wallpaper on the walls and ceilings was falling down on two of us. I blinked, and everything was back to normal, nothing was falling, nothing had moved. I looked at my friend, he looked at me, we both just asked if we saw that, both said yes, then went back to fighting over the computer. Another time, we were in the house alone apart from his little brother who we were looking after. His brother was fast asleep, and we went to bed around 1/2 am. I woke up in the night, someone had turned the hallway light on and a woman I didn't recognize was standing in the doorway. I just thought his parents had brought a friend back and went back to sleep. I woke up again and she was still standing in the doorway. She was pale, very skinny, and had black, curly hair. She just stared at me. Again, didn't think anything of it. I got up in the morning and asked my friend if he saw the woman. He went pale and said yes. We asked his parents who they had brought back with them last night. They said no one. We asked if his mom was playing with a black wig, she said no. There were always strange noises while I stayed in that house, always a light turning on or something when it shouldn't. I wasn't scared of whatever it was, but my friend was. What was a little creepy was his little brother a few times when we were looking after him would wake up in the night, would fall out of bed, bunk bed, which would wake any normal kid up, but he would just walk out of his room and talk to someone in the hallway. My most recent encounter was on Friday. I had to visit my mom's for the first time in ages. We had decided to go shopping and walk to the train station, easiest way into the city, takes half the time. We got across this road and me and my mom noticed a man walking towards us. He was dressed in old military gear. I watched him as he got closer and moved out of his way to let him pass. He walked between me and my boyfriend and carried on around the corner. I watched him until he was out of sight, then asked my mom if she had just seen that. She said yes, my boyfriend hadn't seen him. He didn't see the man at all. My mom just went pale, I just shrugged it off, no big deal to see things, he wasn't scared, he just didn't feel right, like he shouldn't have been there. In my mom's house as a kid, strange things happened. One of the things I remember most was waking up one morning. It was a sunny morning, I opened my eyes and there was a big, black, hooded figure standing next to my bed. I did what any kid would do and hid under my duvet. My heart was pounding in my chest. Once that died down I eventually emerged and whatever it was had vanished. I got straight out of bed and ran into my mom's room and woke her up. Nothing was in the house. Another time, in the same room, I was fast asleep when a strange sound woke me up. Then I felt it. One of my soft toys, this big bear, climbed over me and dropped to the floor. I was terrified and quickly grabbed the bear off the floor, but it didn't move. I kicked all my soft toys apart from Noah out of my room the next day. The last thing I remember in that house was when I got home from school one day. Normally, I would turn on the TV before I went to the toilet, but I was desperate and ran straight upstairs. I did look and the TV was completely unplugged. I thought I could just turn it on quickly and run, but there wasn't time to mess with the plugs, and I had locked the door behind me when I got home because I was going to be home alone for the next few hours. I guess I was 8 or 9 at the time because we didn't have Sky TVs. Anyway, I'm doing my thing when my stomach drops in fear. The TV downstairs had just come on its own. I stayed still, not wanting to investigate. I listened quietly as the volume on the TV was turned right up to max. I quickly finished and edged out of the bathroom. I crawled down a few stairs and looked into the living room. There was no one in there. I eventually plucked up the courage to go downstairs after I ran and grabbed my turbo morphed from my room. I walked down and turned the TV off, silent. I checked the entire house, nothing was there. All the doors and windows were shut and locked. There was no way the TV could have plugged itself in and turned itself on, but it had done. I just turned the TV back on and watched it until my mum came home. It didn't happen again, and my mum dismissed the story. Now at work, I see things sometimes. Other people have reported lights being left on when they unlock in the morning. I thought I was imagining seeing a dark figure out of the corner of my eye upstairs until I started noticing kids saying, "I don't like it up here, can we go?" or something to that effect fairly often. It was more than a few times a week this was happening. A few times, the little kids will just vanish back downstairs and will scare the parents half to death. Whatever it is likes to mess with me something, but I just tell it to leave me alone and it doesn't bother me for a while. What does bother me is being in the staff area upstairs. I can feel it when it's around and it's not a nice feeling. I was locking up one night, doing all the checks. I turned everything off, went to make sure no one was in the boys' toilets. It was all clear. I turned off the light, pulled the door nearly closed before something ripped the door out of my hands and it slammed open again. I just got out of there, grabbed my bike from the landing and left quickly. Didn't bother finishing my checks. Another night I had turned off all the lights, done all the checks. I go to grab my bike from the landing and look back because I feel like something is watching me. A black figure is standing in front of the girls' toilets, just watching me. I looked away, just thinking I was tired. I picked my bike up, looked again and the thing was still standing there. I just walked down the stairs and left. I was in trouble one night, because all the lights were left on all night upstairs after I had locked up. I don't leave the lights on, even when I go up there in the day. I tend to turn all the lights off, just habit. It's happened a few times now. I told one of the guys to stop fussing over it, it wasn't anything we had done. He had locked up the night before and I found the lights on as we went upstairs the next day. He was sure he had turned them all off. So, I told him about the thing up there. All he said was, "So you have seen it too?" No big deal to me really. I just told him to tell it to leave him alone if it bothers him and left it at that. I don't want to scare everyone. Old house in Kentucky. I would hear a ball, or something similar rolling up and down the hall all the time. There were cold spots near the back of the house. My mother, who is a woman of science, would not go in the house. I was sitting alone on the couch and saw a dark-headed girl with a white Victorian dress in the doorway. Well, that image is classic horror movie stuff, so I figured I just saw it in the back of my mind and went on about my business. I told no one. My boyfriend wakes me up in the middle of the night saying that he saw someone at the end of the bed. I told him to describe it to me and he started describing what I had seen earlier. We got the hell out of there for a couple of days. I asked my elderly neighbor if she knew anything odd about the house and she smiled and went inside and closed the door. My mother told one of her friends who had lived on the street when she was a child and she said she knew all about the little girl ghost. I can't help but to be a believer after all that thing. End of story. I politely told the girl to stop showing up because she was scared of me, and she did. It all started when I was about 7 months pregnant with my daughter. I was asleep in bed with my husband. Suddenly I woke up and looked out the doorway to our room. I saw a toddler, who I thought was our 2-year-old son, walk in front of the doorway dragging a blanket behind him and then walk away into the laundry room. I instantly got chills and the hair on my neck was standing on end. But I figured it was just our little guy sleepwalking like his dad used to do as a child. I woke up my husband and asked him to go get our son and take him back to his bed. He looked puzzled but got up and went into the laundry room. "Jaden isn't in here, sweetheart." He spoke. I was baffled. I had been watching the laundry room entranced the whole time. I hadn't seen him leave. My husband went to our son's room across the house and there he was, sound asleep under the blankets in his bed. Eerie. But wait. There's more. I dismissed this occurrence as pregnancy brain and went on with my life. Several months later after our daughter was born I was in the shower while the kids were down for a nap. I was rinsing out my hair when I heard footsteps. Little running footsteps. I opened my eyes, heard a giggle, and saw a little boy, not in the clothes my son was wearing, in a red shirt and jean shorts running across my bathroom into the closet. Strangely I was not freaked out. This has happened several times over the last 5 years since the first time. I'm never really freaked out by him, and he has aged some. He now seems to be 4. He always runs by when I'm in the shower like he's chasing something. The most recent encounter I've had was one morning when my husband and I were asleep. My 2 oldest kids, 5 and 3, came in to wake us up. It was still dark in our room and from the bathroom light behind them, all I could make out was their silhouette. They came in and stood on my husband's side of the bed. He was awake, but didn't open his eyes. I told them both to go potty, and then I would turn on a show for them in our room. I told my older son to let his little sister use our bathroom and for him to use his down the hall. He just stood there, so I repeated myself and he turned and went down the hall. My daughter went into our bathroom. I sat up waiting for them to return. My son came back and sat on the floor waiting. After a minute, he said, "Hey Mom, can you turn on a show?" I said, "Well, let's wait for your sister." He turned around and said, "She's still asleep, Mom." I said, "No she isn't, I saw her go in my bathroom." I got out of bed to check on her. My poor daughter has fallen asleep sitting on the toilet before, so that's what I expected. I went to the bathroom, and it was empty. I quickly went to her room and there she was. Asleep. I had been watching the whole time since my son had come in with who I thought was my daughter. Since then, I hear little footsteps all the time upstairs, if we're all downstairs, or in the hallway when I'm around the corner and my kids are napping. I've got more if anyone wants to hear. My firstborn used to get night terrors, and when I would go running to his room because he was screaming bloody murder at 3 a.m., the room was always ice cold and he was staring at the same corner in the room every time. I've no doubt he has seen things. He is an old soul. When we moved from that house, the night terrors stopped. About a week after moving into our current house, my husband and I were lying in bed about to fall asleep when we both heard glass shatter. We sat straight up in bed, hair bristling on the backs of our necks. I was sure we were getting broken into. My husband got up and checked the house. Nothing. Then I go up and we both searched every window, every room, everything. No broken glass. It sounded as though someone had taken a large glass vase and thrown it to the ground. It was so loud. But we never found anything broken. 3 nights later, I heard it again. My husband was asleep at that time already and didn't hear it, but I woke him so he could help me check. Again, nothing. Then it never happened again. For the first couple years of being in this house, I would hear people talking. If I were upstairs, I could hear them downstairs and vice versa. I could hear them walking up and down my stairs, thumps and creaks and all. They never really scared me, their voices were pleasant and conversational. But here's the weird part, I only heard them when my husband was gone. Like clockwork, he would leave for work or to go out and then a few minutes later, bam. I've also heard a crying baby in my house. It always stopped the moment I got up to investigate. Weird. I've been followed by something in my house. Not sure what it was, but it scared me. It followed me around all day one day making noises behind me, opening and shutting cupboards and drawers, moving things slightly on the counters, etc. Only happened once, but it lasted for nearly 6 hours. My kids didn't notice anything, and I didn't try to draw their attention to it. I'm sure whatever things I've got in my house don't like that I'm writing this, suddenly I'm feeling a bit sick to my stomach, and I've got butterflies in my stomach like that panicky feeling. I do now. It's nearly 200 years old. I've had 2 local teams out to see it. One of the Taps family teams has asked to come out. We have over 100 EVs on disc and some interesting pics and videos. The very first thing that happened to us occurred just before we officially moved in. It was about 2 weeks prior to our move-in date, but we had permission to come in and do some housekeeping. Me, my husband, my adult daughter, my adult son, and his girlfriend were cleaning the kitchen. We decided it was time for a lunch break. The kids decided to go up to McDonald's to get us some food, leaving my husband and me behind. We went back to cleaning the countertops when we heard the swinging kitchen door open and a hi in a small voice. We assumed it was my son's girlfriend, as she had one of those baby voices. We both turned to look, thinking she had forgotten something. No one was there. I walked out the door and looked in the drive, and the car were gone. Something that happens often. My husband is disabled. When he is not doing well and takes to the bed for the day, should I decide to leave the house, I will often have doors slammed before or after I try to leave, or small items will be thrown at me. When one of the teams came in and did their Eve session, they asked why this happens. The response, clear as day, was, bad wife. I guess the ghost thinks I am remiss in my wifely duties for leaving him. In addition, my husband, who hates to be tucked in, will find himself tucked in like a mummy when he's in bed for the day. These are just a few of the things that happen. I had a discussion with the ghosts about throwing things. They stopped. There has never been any feeling of malevolence. Just the odd sights and noises over the years. My husband and I lived in a 150-year-old house that had been split into 2 apartments, top and bottom. We lived upstairs. The back bedroom was always creepy, kind of dark and cold, but we attributed that to it being an old house surrounded by trees. At the time I was in college, so I was up late working while my husband slept. I had left my empty teacup on the desk next to me. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw the cup move about 6 inches and heard it scrape on the desk, too. I didn't really get freaked out though. My cat happened to be sitting nearby and came over, put his paws on the desk and sniffed at the cup. Then he proceeded to freak out. Every hair on his body stood up and his tail quadrupled in size. Then he tore out of the room at top speed. Needless to say, I ran out screaming and jumped on bed with my husband crying. I avoided that room at all costs, and we moved out a few months later. I recently learned that the house is a spa/bed and breakfast, and that room is a guest room.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.